B1, Prologue, 1. Life, then death. That has always been the natural order. But what if that could be changed? What if we could utilize the process of death to create more life? Death, then life. That is what we are building here. Dr. Ava Sherman. Manchester, New Hampshire. 11 years before. Just a little scratch. It was just a little scratch. Private Jack Wilkinson stumbled through the brush as distant alarms faded. Another few miles through the forest, and he'd be in the clear. God damn though, how he had never had a headache half as severe. Every step felt like a hammer to his ears. Every heartbeat sent another throb to his scalp. The sun might as well have been shooting needles straight into his eyes. It was too fucking bright. Had he been this tired when he'd woken up, or his legs this tense? It had been a long night, and he'd spent most of it in the bottle. Figured that he would have a day like this after a night like that. Keep your mask on, they told him. Yet, well, he'd kept the damn mask on. The whole hazmat get up too. From the full visor, air-supplied respirator that always smelled like ass, to the steel-toed boots and attached shanks that made his feet numb after a couple minutes of use, to the hefty SCBA that had to be strapped to his back, to the plastic fabric that draped over the whole mess, and chafed against his skin like an expired condom. Jack had worn all the right gear, and done everything by the book. It wasn't on him that things went south the moment they got down there. What else could he have done when management hadn't told them shit? Jack checked his arm again. A thin, red line ran an inch down his arm where he'd been grabbed. Just a scratch, and not much else. It had barely even broken the skin. And yet, Dr. Sherman's words played over and over in his mind. Any contact had to be reported. Could he have gotten the same thing as those people downstairs? Jack shook his head. Stress was getting to him. He'd just been through the ringer today, and would no doubt be feeling the weight of Ian's legal team down his throat the moment they figured out he'd made a run for it. That was fine. He could worry about lawsuits and NDAs and all that other bullshit coming his way afterwards, so long as he got out now. And so Jack kept moving. One step at a time, one foot in front of the other, his sole companion the terror that had brought him here. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Was this what Ava wanted? Ever since that first moment where humans evolved enough cognizance to identify their own mortality, they had done everything in their power to stave off death. Society became developed in order to maximize the odds of survival through safety of numbers. Structures were raised that were capable of surpassing natural disasters. Damage that the body sustained could be repaired with the advent of medicine. Under a more pronounced lens, one might argue that humanity had always premised its existence against the inevitability of death. An endless battle waged by just about every member of the species, each successive iteration better equipped than the last. Their struggles had borne success as well. The groundwork was laid by generations of her scientific predecessors, and victory had finally been achieved. With this latest breakthrough, death was irrefutably defeated. And yet, Dr. Ava Sherman could not help but wonder. Was this what she wanted? She stared into the eyes of her patient. They were white, empty, and without purpose, just like every other successful subject in the HBRS trials. His animation had been restored, but it lacked the context of a healthy-minded adult, as if the patient's very soul had been sucked out, leaving only a gaping, hollow husk. A vegetable that could still move. One of her attendees leaned in. Private Turner, can you understand us? The patient thrashed against his restraints. Her attendee withdrew a step, his head bobbing about from within the hazmat suit that Ava had made them all wear. This was not the first time they had witnessed such aggression from inside the walls of Ian Dynamics' Manchester facility, but this was perhaps the only time it had ever been observed outside their control. Ava studied her environment anew. The temporary hospice room on the second floor of R&D was far from ideal, even with the plastic dividers that had been affixed to the windows, and armed security patrolling the corridors outside, but it was all they had to work with after the breach had first been reported. Until she knew exactly what had happened in the sub-basement lab, she could not risk letting anything get off site. Too much was at stake. Billy Turner, her attendee said again, please respond. It's no use, Ava explained, her eyes fixed on the medical equipment behind. He's already gone. Her attendee noticed the same anomaly with a gasp. Even though their patient still flailed about like a rabid dog, the heart monitor showed nothing but a dead, flat line. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Jack pushed a branch out of the way, and nearly fell flat the moment the weight shifted. This forest was too dense. Fucking hell, he cursed, his lungs heavy. He hadn't felt this weak for ages. Maybe since basic. Again he looked into the New Hampshire sky, and again he swore he could feel the literal weight of the sun pressing against his face. The roof of his mouth could have been filled with cotton, yet his hair was drenched in sweat. Hot and cold reversed, light more painful than dark. His scalp was rebelling against his brain, and all his other senses were taking part. What the hell was happening to him? The scratch had gone inflamed too. What had started as a normal scarlet line had blackened with all the grime, and it almost looked like some of the nearby veins were darkening too. Jack paused, the images of what he'd seen downstairs still trapped in his mind. That blankness in their eyes. The noise they'd made when they attacked. If anything like that ever happened to him. Jack blinked through the growing headache. There was still a chance to get out of this. If he made a beeline away from Ian's base, he could work his way to safety before they found him. His only hope was to go straight for the Wait. What's that word? Recipe? Restoration? Receiver? The one with water. He had to have driven by that place 1,000 times before. Him and Willie. That was wrong. Him and Billy. They'd gone by that water place a bunch. They'd driven by it on the way to work. Why couldn't he remember the fucking word? Reservoir. That's it. He needed to get to the reservoir. It'd be safe there. Jack let out a deep breath to clear his mind. No more time to think. Whatever was happening to his head could wait. He had to keep moving. Keep breathing. Had to get to the reservoir now. Consequences later. B1, Prologue, 2. It had been a massacre. Ava studied the scene from behind her polyethylene suit, her breath struggling to stay even as it recycled back into the respirator strapped to her face. Her colleagues laid scattered about the main hall where they had been left, their bodies perforated with bullets. Blood was still leaking out before congealing into a solid mass in the center of the pile where they had fallen. Other staff kept a healthy distance as they snapped photographs and collected samples. It was the eyes that drew Ava's attention most. Pupils widened until they were blank slates. Neither angry nor malicious, but empty and lifeless. Just like the affected soldier upstairs. Ava gulped without intent. These were her people. Her fellow scientists. Men and women of intellect and wealth and prestige. All reduced to this. This type of breach should not have been possible. They had conducted the bulk of the HBRS trials in their sub-basement laboratory. The entire unit was self-contained, with its own air filtration network, showers for decontamination, biometric locks on the doors, and insulation in the walls to prevent the outflow of unwanted electronic signals. The Department of Defense had insisted on the extra security, and EN Dynamic had no choice but to yield to the whims of their top investor. How many hours of Ava's own life had she spent locked in this prison over a false alarm? Her sight fell to EN Dynamic's insignia sitting proudly above. It was no more than the letters AD in a custom, modernized font, along with an arrow cutting through the center of the A, pointing right. Marketing had been responsible for that decision. EN Dynamic was a forward-thinking company. Customers were supposed to infer that mindset whenever they saw the logo. Ava started to consider this design more philosophically, however. EN was a derivation of the word life, and being dynamic meant that it was in constant flux. Though the implication was that life could be progressed forward through the power of this company, change was capable of expanding in any direction. Forward, backward, or even laterally. It was that last point that felt the most salient. As Ava stared at the infected corpses of her colleagues, she wondered which way that life had been altered here. Had her research brought it forward as she had dreamed, or had she merely pushed life into its own unique state? General Tyson drew close, his own meaty frame bulging against the hazmat suit. Any idea how this happened yet? Ava sighed. We're still collecting data. You think it might be sabotage? That is irrelevant at this point. The priority is to mitigate exposure. She glanced his way. Has anyone else on the security team showed symptoms? He shook his head. No. As far as we can tell, Private Turner was the only one who got exposed. I was informed that he was attacked after pulling someone off of Private Wilkinson. He paused. Wilkinson's still missing. The blood froze in her veins. You have to find him, John. My people are working double time to track him down, but he slipped into the woods after breaking quarantine. It'd be faster if we used dogs. No dogs. We can't risk cross-exposure until we understand how communicability occurred. Your men are on their own until we have him in custody, and they'll all need level 3 suits or higher. Nothing less. Tyson gulped. It really that bad? Let me make one thing clear. If we don't find him, facing some Senate oversight committee will be the least of our worries. Ava studied the corpses of her dead colleagues. We need to control this now, or what happened here will happen everywhere. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Couldn't think. Couldn't remember. His mind kept coming in and out. Jack tried to focus, and focus real hard at that, but he'd only make it a few moments before his head would drift into something else, and then he'd forget whatever it was that he'd just been thinking about. Plans, thoughts, memories. All so confusing right now. Jack couldn't remember what his mother looked like. How could he not remember her? They'd been living together for 18 years in their trailer in Tennessee. Or had that been North Carolina? He shouldn't have been forgetting something like that. It wasn't normal to forget something like that. He should have known what his ex-fiancée looked like. That was right. They'd spent 7 months together in her parents' home in Milwaukee. Or was that with his mother? His mother's house in Milwaukee. It was somewhere, that was for sure. Every second. Every moment. Another battle on its own. Why was it all getting so goddamned jumbled? Was this what it was like for them? Thinking. Fighting. Losing? Did all those science folks slowly forget themselves, little by little, their minds emptying from the inside out? Maybe this was dying. If the soul left the body when it passed, then maybe his soul was just draining out, drop by drop. That would be okay if there was a heaven. He didn't need his body in heaven. He'd be whole again once there. But maybe there was no heaven. Maybe this was it, and each memory he forgot was another lost forever. Gone. Poof. Drifted back into the ether where it had started. That would be bad. What was the sum of a man's soul, but all that he had collected within his mind? His dreams and nightmares, his fears and hopes, the memories of all he'd hated and loved. What would life become with those taken away? Would he still be a man, or just an empty husk? Dead. Hollow. A body without a soul. He couldn't let that happen. He couldn't go hollow like the science folks back there. He had to keep moving. It wouldn't be far now. Safety was close. Had to get to the reservoir. There was hope there. A chance to survive. But still, he had one question left. Why couldn't he remember his name? Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Ava remembered the moment that had first driven her down this path. It had been in the ICU with her parents, all those decades ago. No one had known at the time that the source of their illness was a ruptured boiler that had saturated their home with carbon monoxide, so the doctors were just as powerless as her against the force that had slowly leached the life from them. An invisible, unstoppable enemy that had claimed the only family she had ever known. Ava had made a promise to herself back then. She knew that she would accomplish an insurmountable goal. Death itself would be defeated by her hands. No matter the odds. No matter the struggle. She would become the person to accomplish that feat. Her life had been built around this dream. From the pre-medical and chemistry double majors she had taken in undergraduate studies, to the ever more demanding biophysics masters and MD after her postgraduate residency, to the eventual PhD she had acquired, to her recruitment into EN Dynamic. It had all been building to here and now. So why must the prize have been tainted? The helicopter sliced through the air, with Tyson by her side. We've blocked the main road into Manchester, Tyson explained, and I've got a cordon established on the outskirts of the city. A second team is getting prepped to secure the reservoir due south of here, but it will take some time before they're out. Currently, we're prioritizing the main routes of traffic since that's where we believe he's heading. Good, Ava said, her voice hoarse against the whir of the helicopter. We'll want to make sure that the forest is evacuated if we plan to sterilize it properly. I've been in talks with the Pentagon to get napalm at the quantities you're demanding, but don't you think this is a little excessive? HBRS pseudocells should degrade almost instantaneously outside the human body, but we still don't know how the initial team was exposed. He sighed. No way we'll be keeping this under wraps. Ava nodded. Yes, this will lead to a media firestorm that will destroy most of our benefactors, and I suspect that you and I will end up in jail before this is over. But the alternative is worse. It has been less than 6 hours since the breach was first reported, and we've had multiple generations of transmission. At the rate to which HBRS is proliferating in infected subjects, a majority of people in a city the size of Manchester would be infected in days if it is not properly contained. And they wouldn't be alone, Tyson deduced. No, they would not, Ava considered, her thumb on the report from today's trial run. HBRS 15.21, it said. A rather mundane title for what had taken over a decade of research to achieve. It was her magnum opus, the utmost pinnacle of biophysical developments. And yet, it still was not enough, for HBRS 15.21, like any of its predecessors, could never quite capture the fragility of the human mind. That power was beyond her grasp, and so long as such an ethereal essence could not be preserved past death, the entire process was a waste. Humanity would not have truly escaped its prison. They would have merely swapped one warden with another. As Ava stared out the helicopter window and into the city, she knew the truth. This phenomenon could not be allowed to roam free. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Free. 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 That's what he was. Free. Had gotten out. Now they couldn't catch him. Had to keep moving. Keep from getting caught. Trees thinning. Water close. Get to water. Water was free. Almost all gone now. The thoughts. The memories. They were his once. But not now. Getting sick. Going hollow. Couldn't let that happen. Had to keep moving. Body dying too. Blood coming out. Nose. Mouth. Hands covered. Skin whiter than normal. Getting whiter. Everywhere in pain. Not much time left. Then there were noises. Voices. Chopper above. Getting close. Couldn't stop. Move faster away. Had to save self. He could see it. The reservoir. Only hope. Used to feed city. People there. Just had to walk closer. Move to it. Nothing else mattered. Get to reservoir and save self. Couldn't die. Couldn't let mind go hollow. Couldn't end like this. He slipped. Legs not working. Body tumbling. Into reservoir. So cold. Everything dark. Mind almost gone. No more control. No way to move. Only death now. This wasn't fair. It wasn't his fault. It was just. It was just. Just. A. Scratch. B1, Chapter 1, Typhoon Season, 1. Still no word from officials after the city of Manchester was placed on lockdown following a chemical leak from EN Dynamics' nearby facility, though inside sources have suggested that the affected area could be widened. Catherine Carson. Boston, Massachusetts. 8 hours after. Was there anyone out there? Distant clouds grew darker by the moment, waves beat against Purgatory's shore with a rising urgency, and the stink of sweat was thick in the air as the last strands of twine were secured in place. This was a depressing thought. A bloody miserable one, at that. Liam wouldn't allow himself to think it often, but now that his final preparations were coming together, the bastard had once again wormed its way into his mind, and not even an approaching typhoon could uproot it. He grit his teeth and kept working. Oh sure, the usual concessions could always be made. Rescue was coming, they'd just been delayed. Communications had gone down before the crash after all, and there was no telling just how far off course he'd been. This part of the world wasn't tied to shipping lanes, so it was no surprise that boats did not frequent them by chance. That was all logical and irrefutable and not just some set of false hopes. But then the oppressive weight of Liam's time here always crushed against his resolve, again and again. Sure, he'd lost his radio during the crash, but the GPS-linked transponder would have told rescuers exactly where to come, had they been out there. Half the world had been watching his flight when it had first left Santa Monica. Someone should have come. It just wasn't realistic to think otherwise. No matter how hard he tried, the cancerous and unyielding anchor of doubt always made its way back in, leaving him with the simplest of all explanations. Nobody's coming for you because there are no people left. A straightforward, clean, and wholly cruel answer to all his questions, and one that he lacked the necessary human support to disprove. Other than his old canteen, he had no companionship whatsoever, and Thirsty wasn't much of a talker. So it was that Liam Fenix had been trapped on this island he called Purgatory for well over a decade, though who was counting? He took a gulp of water, his eyes focused on the growing storm. Though the sky was clear above his head, the same could not be said for the horizon. A grey wall had furrowed itself out there some hours before, leaving a darkened trail that bordered black in its wake. Now that the beast had marched this close to Purgatory, Liam could see the telltale sign of rain leaching light from the clouds through whitened streaks before spilling into the world beneath. Waves continued to batter against the shore as if to escape from the typhoon itself. But as he studied the clouds anew and considered their pace, he wiped the beads of sweat from his brow and leaned back. Patience, Liam. There was still time to do this right, and he could not afford to make errors by burning himself out. Not if he planned to survive the day. Gonna be a long one today, Thirsty. Liam said to his canteen, his breath evening out. Yet. Me and you are going on our biggest adventure yet. One that they'll be talking about for the ages. If we make it. Not gonna lie to you, mate. The odds here are steeper than we're used to, and we might not be getting out of this without a few scratches. He sighed. But we've got no choice, yet. This storm's closing in by the second, and if we don't leg it, we'll be stuck for another year. You don't want to stay here for another year, do you? Liam let the silence hang a moment, twisting his canteen around. Thirsty was a military-style plastic green canteen, with a little smiley face and motto that read "Life is good" on the side. How long had Liam owned Thirsty? Since before the show, that was for sure, though it wasn't until Purgatory that he'd begun to make conversation with him. Of course, Liam was no nutter, and knew that Thirsty was an inanimate object, but old habits died hard, and he'd been talking to inanimate objects for longer than he could remember. Hell, he'd once made a decent living doing just that. Speaking aloud was also good for morale. Something desperately needed at a time like this. Liam took another swallow. The dregs of his drinking water clung to the roof of his mouth, reminding him of the irony of his predicament. He had been forced into this spot after an intense drought, and had prayed daily for the arrival of an early monsoon season. But now that plans had changed and arrangements could not be undone, how he wished for nothing other than to have the rains be delayed another day. Best we get what's left, mate, Liam decided before marching back to camp. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. His shelter came into view first. The plane had bounded off the beach during the crash and landed into the trees nearby, where it had lost both wings. Its fuselage had then flipped before stopping, which was fortunate, given the circumstances. Though it had been trashed beyond repair in the process, the brunt of its final impact went to the empennage and not the cockpit. It was a bloody miracle that Liam had survived with no worse than a sprained ankle and dislocated shoulder. He'd long since recovered from both and taken the wreck as sustainable shelter. Smoke still hissed from last night's fire, doing well to keep the flies away from his tannery as his latest pigskin patch cured. The sun cast a long shade onto his workshop, where he'd crafted all the tools he'd needed over the years. Knives and hammers, shears and fire starters, spears and bows. It was a shame that he'd have to abandon most of it soon. His rations were looking good at least, as Liam had accrued a hefty haul of red snappers, along with a rogue yellowtail, tossed them in the smoker, and salted them into jerky. With a supplemental supply of coconuts, yucca, and the last of the pineapples, his diet wouldn't be hurting for quite some time. The snares were still empty, but he hadn't had high hopes that a pigeon or piglet would get too bold. This drought had killed most of them off. Liam ascended his makeshift ladder, up from the base of the fuselage and into the cliff he'd renovated. The wood cracked and moaned with each step, but it still had some life left in it. Hopefully enough to survive the day. Liam grimaced as he examined the network of hollowed-out coconuts that he fashioned his cistern. Not near enough. He had 12 total, each linked to a crude pipe network of bamboo shoots that filled first when it rained before overflowing into a nearby pool. The coconut shell's insulation kept water from evaporating while reducing bacteria growth, and because of the way he'd landscaped the cliffside, any rainwater eventually worked its way down to him. But it had not rained in weeks, and so the pool had drained first, followed by the shells, one by one. By now, he only had 3 days' worth of water, provided he consolidated them together. A gust of chilled air cut through the camp, reminding Liam of the urgency of this crisis. It will have to do. He quickly scooped up what he could, funneled it all together, and made for the ladder. He'd have to remember to collect as much rainwater as possible as soon as he got the chance. There was still plenty of time to accomplish both goals. But the moment his foot hit the ladder again, a rung finally snapped. Liam instinctively reached for the cliffside, but both his hands were full. His heart skipped a beat as his body drifted powerlessly through the air. And then his head struck the ground. B1, Chapter 1, Typhoon Season, 2. Promise me, Liam, Nellie said. Promise you'll be back. Of course, love, Liam said. Always have, and always will. Promise me, she repeated. Promise me. Liam realized that he was alone in the plane, and Nellie was far away. The throttle screamed in his hands as the fuselage quaked. A trail of smoke spilled from one side where the flap had dislodged. Liam fought against the turbulence, but the wing's rotary engine was coughing up sparks and wasn't long for this world. Promise me, Nellie repeated. Promise you'll come back home. I'm coming, Nellie. Liam screamed below his oxygen mask, but the plane's radio antenna must have been nicked when the flap went, and she could not hear him. I'll make it home. Just you wait. He flipped the emergency brakes and retracted the other flap a beat. There was no way he'd have a clear landing, but if he could keep himself stable long enough, he could at least limp his way south to Hawaii. Promise me. Don't leave us. Warning lights flashed across the cockpit and the fuselage moaned under the added strain, but Liam kept his arms locked and eyes on the horizon. I won't lose you. He roared. But then purgatory rose in front. Its twin hills stood above the beach like two dark eyes, pulling him in. Liam resisted as hard as any human could, but the throttle had a mind of its own, and the plane had found the one piece of solid land in sight. Liam gasped. No, you bastard. Not here. It can't be here. Promise me, Liam. Promise you'll be back home. The sand rushed forth. It rolled to either side like arms, ready to embrace him. Faster and faster, longer and wider. The beach prostrated itself into a runway, even as the rest of the sea turned sharp and jagged. Promise me, Liam. Promise me. Oh, God, he cried. I'm sorry, Nellie. I'm so sorry. He stopped struggling. The plane was going down. There was no choice. If he was to survive another day, it would have to be here. The second engine finally gave, and the plane began to stall, but purgatory stood as it always had. Ready to grab him. Ready to save him. Ready to imprison him. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Liam awoke with a groan. The world was grey and blurry, and his head was on fire. He started to stroke his scalp, but thought better of it halfway through. This pain was too much. At least the air was cool. A powerful but steady breeze washed over him. Liam breathed deep, his thoughts coming back together. When was the last time he'd escaped from the oppressive heat of the sun? It was a godsend to feel such a strong, chill wind on his skin again. Until he remembered the source. Liam lurched straight up and took in his world once again. The clear, blue sky had been replaced by a pale, darkened roof. The roar of water against rock echoed from the shoreline, even this far away. And everywhere he looked, the trees were bent inland, struggling against the torrent that was only just beginning to press against them. How long had he been out? A crack eclipsed the sound of the wind, and Liam was powerless to watch as one of the palms tipped over. The stump dislodged itself from the top of the cliffside and tumbled through his cistern before crashing directly into the valley below. Planks and dust exploded out where it struck his campsite. Most people weren't well versed on the nuances of naturalist living. Their idea of it had been romanticized by popular culture. They'd think of a heavily muscled man, his shirt sweaty yet somehow never dirty, always sprinting through the trees, spear brandished as he stalked some new prey. One day, he'd be cave diving. The next, he'd be fighting sharks in a reef. The next, he'd be climbing a mountain for some essential purpose. Every day an adventure, every hour a battle of life or death. With all modern amenities gone, what else could life be but a savage war against a chaotic and unforgiving world? But the truth was quite droll. Whether it was his time or his energy, Liam had to spend each efficiently, lest his circumstances turn bleak. Why run when he could walk? Why scale a cliff when he could go around? The destination was the same, but the path was less demanding. In the end, Liam spent most of his days simply walking from one place to another as he strategized what else was needed to stay alive. That's what it all came down to. Sustainability. Death stalked the unwary differently than people imagined. It wasn't about getting mauled by a tiger or being buried in a landslide. Any seasoned survivalist had already developed countermeasures against those risks within the first few days of isolation. No, death was a slower burn. It'd come from that cough that wouldn't quite go away, or that summer heat that was a bit too intense, or those weeks where game was a little too scarce, or perhaps, some combination of each. So to see a tree crash right in the middle of camp as its tsunami of bad weather closed in. It was hard to put into words just how completely fucked Liam was right about now. He jumped to his feet and rushed through the camp, gathering what little he could salvage. Rain began to fall. At first a mere couple drops splashed against his face, but it wasn't long before the typhoon struck in full force. His old pilot suit became drenched within moments. This was bad. Very, very bad. He had lost too much time unconscious, and there was no way for this to end in any manner close to how he'd envisioned. Hell, even under the best of conditions, this plan of his was equal parts reckless and bold. The kind of plot that screamed against every fiber of his being. But now that the weather had turned, it was damned near suicidal. Liam gathered the last of his supplies, rushed back to the beach, and gazed upon his final hope. 2 drums of bamboo shoots laid wrapped above a landing of smooth stone, angled into the sea. A double-layered slate of wood sat atop the main deck, breaking only for a wooden rudder that cut below, and a matching mast that towered above. Its sail was woven from a mix of scavenged nylon and cured pigskin, and would have more than enough strength to capture the wind once it was unfurled. Even the main deck had ample room for storage, shelter, and a fire pit, all without compromising the greater design. The total construction must have weighed more than 2 tons, taken the better part of a year to rebuild after last year's catastrophe, and had cost more calories and grit than he could count. As escape rafts went, Liam had done quite well for himself. He rubbed the water from his eyes and gave Thirsty a pat. Come on, come on. Now or never, mate. We've got to get going if we're to survive this. He paused in spite of himself. Survive. A word that had once meant so much to him. It was his livelihood. His identity. He'd gotten so many things accomplished utilizing its every nuance, ever since those first days of his youth where he'd look out the window of his family's home in Bristol and stare into the trees. And yet, now that very same word had become his prison, because if there was one thing that was anathema to survivalism above all else, it was risk, and there was no greater risk than swapping a tenuous but established struggle for one that was unknown entirely. To escape now would be to jeopardize not just everything he had done to survive on this island, but to hurl himself into exponentially worse odds and hope for the best. All for this naive dream of his. It's not just a dream, Liam reminded himself. It was Nellie. It was Lilith. His wife and his daughter. They were real. They were his. And he'd abandoned them. But not anymore. Liam fought against the torrent as he loaded the last of his supplies. Sure, his mind rebelled against the stupidity of the act, but his heart fought twice as hard. He'd been sucking the narcotic of complacency for too long. It was time to fight. The shore was steep, waves were smashing below, and the stone had been carved to match, but his raft was still anchored in place by a single set of logs, lodged at just the right angle and altitude to keep static friction from being overcome on its own. The second they were pulled, however, gravity would take control, and there would be no going back. Promise me, Nellie had said. Liam had been a young man when he'd left, only in his 30s, with still so much life in front of him. He threw Thirsty and his coconuts into the bin he'd fashioned to keep them from spilling. Promise me. He'd told her that he'd be back, and had meant it with every fiber of his being. What little food he'd scavenged came next, shoved inside the raft's shelter to keep the wind from tearing them away. Promise me. Liam had never expected it to take this long, and truly believed that someone would have come for him. The linens were stored next, along with his tools. There was no telling how long he'd be stuck at sea. Promise me. So long as he was alive, there was still a chance to be saved, and to have sacrificed himself on some stupid escape plan would have guaranteed nothing more than an unfulfilled promise. Promise me. He thrust in his weapon's last set of spears, a bow, and his last dozen arrows. If this was to be his end, then he would go down swinging. Promise me. The typhoon exploded in front, but Liam was beaming back like a Viking rushing for Valhalla. Well, Thirsty, he cheered. Let's get ourselves back home. He yanked the anchor free. The raft screamed as it scraped against the stone and gained speed. It tumbled into the sea. Liam braced against the mast, his heart racing. As wood struck water, the entire raft quaked before rocketing through the reef. Liam rushed for his oars. He wouldn't have much time before the unstable tide forced him back into the rocks. Sea water rained from above, he gasped with each breath, and no matter how hard he pushed against the storm's chaos, he seemed to gain little purchase. His face reddened, and his heart thumped against the wind. The raft moaned against the assault, from above as well as below. This would not last. His raft was sound enough to survive against the initial assault, but it was already beginning to crack in some places, and if he did not clear shallow water soon, it would break apart altogether. It had not been built to handle the level of strain it would face as soon as it got trapped against the reef. The reef. Liam remembered. He plunged his oar low and grinned when it struck something solid. The intensity of this storm could be worked to his advantage, as the depth of these exaggerated swells were lower than ever. Low enough to anchor his oar into the reef below for added strength. Liam changed tactics, and timed his thrusts against the beat of the waves. Little by little, second by second, the battle turned in his favor. With each swell that struck supplemented by the advantage his oar gave him, the undercurrent bought him a few feet more. Soon his oar missed the reef altogether, but by then, Liam looked up and realized that purgatory was farther away than he had ever seen it. Had he won? There was no time to waste. With a final pull against the mast, the sail unfolded. The handmade fabric hissed but once before catching the typhoon's gusts. It quaked as Liam adjusted the angle, but it did not tear loose. The raft launched further into the sea where it would not break. There the tide took control again as he hit an offshore channel. He laughed. It started as a giggle, but grew into a roar as the sheer stupidity of his fears became undone. He was Liam fucking Fenix, and if there was one thing that he'd learned to do over the course of his interesting life, it was to stare the natural kingdom in the eyes and force it to submit to his will. Not even a storm of this magnitude could stop him. As Purgatory's shores disappeared into the haze of falling rain and the raft rocked against the waves, Liam had only one thought left. Wherever you are. Whatever has happened to you. I'm coming for you, Nellie. You and Lilith both. B1, Chapter 2, Day at the Beach. This won't be a normal sermon tonight. You all know what happened at the community center. You all know what will happen to us if we wait for help. I ask not that you listen to me as your pastor. I ask only that you embrace the message of our Lord. One last time. Father Elijah Campbell. Larkspur, Colorado. 20 days after. Was there anyone out there? That was all Leah could think as she stared into the empty sea. A gray, overcast sky hung low today, with the waves beating against the beach to match. She'd heard a lot about what lay behind this endless wall, and seen some of it in pics and on video too. But for all her time in this world, Leah had never crossed that threshold, nor graced distant lands. For all she knew, there was nothing past those waves but more sea, pressing against the sand until it swallowed all in sight. Who could say otherwise? As Leah watched the daily assault of water against shore, she wondered how humans had once thought themselves bold enough to stand against the system that they were mere cogs within. Maybe pandemonium was all that remained, a little pocket of fiery chaos in a world trying to reorder itself, no more than an echo of the civilization that had come before. Maybe life had run its course, and only death remained. Soon, the echoes would fade, the embers would die, and there would be nothing left but the dark, grey sea. The hollowing would reach its finality, and the world would reset as it had before. No people. No stories. No future. Only death. Or maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe death was no more than the inverse of life, and the two stood in balance, with one never being able to overtake the other. After all, the waves beat without end, but the shore stood obstinate to each blow. For all the strength of the ocean at large, there was an equally powerful continent to her back, one that was just as dark and dismal as the world beyond, but where the spark of life still remained. If the ruins of America had survived, then there could still be innumerable places where life fought for survival, always destined to lose each battle, but still able to win the greater war against death. Or maybe Leah had just had too much to eat. She'd been coming to the coast more these days between hunts, an act that Mastermind would always tell her was a waste, once before leaving, and again the second she returned. He hadn't been wrong yet. Every time Leah made her way out here, she'd face the void for hours on end, hoping that something new might come from such nothingness, but always leaving disappointed, a wasted day and hours of her own time extinguished, never to be regained. Would it ever change? A gurgle erupted between the cacophony of waves, its owner nearby. A hollow had washed onto the beach, perhaps 20 paces away. As its head turned her way, it grunted and wobbled to its feet. Leah frowned. Leave it to nothing to conjure more nothing, she reflected. Such was to be expected, these days. She pulled her burgundy scarf over her nose and went to face the interloper, matching its puppet movements with her disciplined own. She would face death again and win. Drawing close, the hollow was much smaller than Leah had suspected, perhaps half her height, with a feminine frame beneath rags that had once been clothes. A child when the hollowing had begun, now forever trapped in a child's body. The hair had long since fallen out, save for a few strands, seaweed clinging stubbornly within. But it was the eyes that gave Leah pause. For a moment, she thought she'd seen a flicker of light, but they were empty and without meaning, just like the sea that had vomited them up. White pupils narrowed onto her own as the hollow raised its arms, the hunger its sole mechanism. Nothing in there, hey? Leah asked. The hollow hissed. Sea water spilled from its lips. Worth a try. Leah drew her trusted pistol from its holster, a M1911 with a hair trigger installed for ease, and a customized suppressor that had a wider tube and an interior coated with a gas-absorbent grease. The metal pressed against the rough fabric of her black leather gloves as she unlocked the safety. The hollow marched on, oblivious to the finality it would soon face. What else could be expected? When the mind was gone and only the hunger remained, there was no alternative. Hollows were superior to her in that way. By not having souls of their own, they never had to struggle with the questions of life and death, or the eternal war between the two. They just walked, ate, and when circumstances permitted, they died again, this time for good. Leah pulled the trigger. It was a single shot. Clean. Straight between the eyes, and out the other side. The sand puffed out where the bullet struck the beach, and the hollow groaned one last time before flopping, with no more movement of note. Leah holstered her 1911. Got anything good, at least? The dead hollow said nothing. Yet? Well, fuck you too. Leah drew her black steel combat knife and went to work, slicing through the remains of clothes in the hopes of deriving value within. In her experience, most had hollowed on the run, with some item or other on hand, and one that they'd valued more than life itself. It might have been a pick, or a toy, or a family heirloom, or perhaps something with more utility, like a pocket knife, or a watch, or even a book. Children were no exception. When the hollowing came and humanity clamored to escape its day of judgment, everyone rushed any way they could, no doubt certain that they could weather the storm. In the end, all were proven wrong. To Leah's disappointment, whatever this hollow might have had in life, its time rotting in the sea had stripped it of anything important. The pockets had been torn inside out where they hadn't fused with rotted flesh below, and any cloth still loose had all but disintegrated. Leah found its marks, at least. A half-dozen incisions just shy of the shoulder, with deeper scars running down the back, and a matching pair below. A mix of black and maroon, contrasted against the deep blue bloat of its otherwise untorn flesh. The girl had been bitten. No surprise, really. Most took bites before hollowing, those scratches weren't the rarest wound in the world. This girl hadn't been so fortunate in life, and based off the level of degradation, even less so, in death. Do me a favor and die with some bullets next time, Leah quipped. That cool. The hollow said nothing. Leah sighed. Enough playing for today. She cradled the dead hollow in her arms and wandered into the sea. The waves beat against her steel-toed combat boots first, and then her faded jeans next, and then up to the rim of her sheepskin jacket. As the water pressed against her waist, Leah gave the hollow one last look. The clouded eyes were locked with hers, as empty in death as they had been in undeath, yet still calling to her all the same. Why fight? Why survive? Why cling to this mockery of life? Why not let it end, as death had intended? Leah supposed that it was questions like these that truly drove her to this barren beach. What was an ocean, but every reservoir that had ever been drained, and how else could she face that inevitability, but with her own continued existence? So long as she remained herself, she could still think and feel and remember, and enjoy, and experience all that this world had to offer. As terrible as this form of existence could be, it was still hers, and only death's finality could take that away. But if she fought against that fate until the bitter end, every second she gained would be hers forever. Perhaps that was all Leah needed. She dropped the corpse. The tide receded, and with it, the hollow was sucked back beneath the waves where it had come. Leah went back for the shore, leaving death defeated yet again. As she wrung the water from her jeans and poured it from her boots, her peripherals scanned the ocean one last time. An object popped into view, just on the cusp of the horizon, dark and brown against the backdrop of blue. Her eyes strained tighter, and for a moment, she could almost make it out. Is that a raft? Here? Only Seaside had boats anymore, and they almost never brought them this far south. Not without a good reason, anyway. This one was also coming from the west. Nobody ever came from out there. Leah yanked her binoculars free, rubbed down the lens, and narrowed back onto the horizon. Only to have her hopes dashed. Her raft was no more than a rusted buoy, drifting with the tide, with no life to herald of its own. Leah put her tools away, gave her boots one final squeeze, and moved to leave. Yet again, she had vindicated her own fears, with nothing new to report but another day wasted. Maybe next time, she told herself. I'll find proof that there's still a single living human in this world. My kind couldn't have wiped them all out. Though she wasn't sure if she believed it. B1, Chapter 3, The Xinu 1. MRS Sherman, are you really telling me that the only way to stop this thing is to incinerate an entire city? No, Mr. President. What I'm telling you is that because you waited to have this conversation, we'll have to nuke several. Dr. Ava Sherman. Washington, D.C. 4 days after. This was definitely taking longer than Liam had expected. It had been well over a week at sea, and though his raft was as strong as ever, his body could not say the same. His lips were chapped and split against the endless sprays of salt water, and his skin had turned bright red. The sun beat down without mercy, making it difficult to recover properly from the concussion he had gained back at Purgatory. Fresh water was also running low. That had always been a possibility, though he had been lucky enough to use the typhoon to his advantage once he'd cleared the coastline. His sail had been designed in such a way that rain funneled into a centralized barrel, where it had remained for collection. But then some days later, a few rogue waves managed to pollute it with seawater, and he'd been stuck with rationing out thirsty ever since. For all his ingenuity, he could not have accounted for everything. Which was what made this next risk all the more appealing. Off at the cusp of the horizon, a cargo ship sat. At first, Liam had assumed it to be a mere mirage, no more than a passing fever dream spawned from his injury. But the more time passed, the longer it persisted, until he was certain of its existence. He'd then started his fire pit, using rubber from the plane's wheels to create a thick, blackened smoke. If there ever was a time to launch his homemade flare, it would have been then. But the ship had not moved. It appeared to only drift with the current, and after getting his raft within a kilometer of it, the sight of rust and stillness did little to ease his mind. What were the chances of finding a derelict in the open ocean like this? Or, better yet, what could have happened to cause one to form? Liam watched the monstrosity floating in front. The current was pushing the cargo ship back west, but the wind had brought his raft's momentum onward to the east. The two were now moving in different channels, and even if Liam had all the strength in the world, he suspected that he would not be able to close the gap by hand. There was no way out of it. To explore this new environment risked sacrificing his current one. Another uncertainty, another timetable that wasn't on his side. Why was the world always so cruel? Liam sat immobile, his eyes fixed on the cargo ship. This was his prayers answered, the best shot he could take, his nightmare born anew. It was the apple being dangled in front of Eve. Was it worth risking his life another time? Promise me. Again Liam thought of Nellie. Of the memory of her voice. Of his hand in her hair. Of that moment the two had first met. Of their years together in Alaska, living the life they'd always dreamed. He thought of Lilith, and the moment she had let go of his hand to walk a few steps on her own. He thought of how old she must be by now, and how much she had suffered without his love. He thought of all the mistakes he'd made in putting his pride over her well-being. Liam knew what he had to do. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Swimming the kilometer of distance proved simple, as did scaling up the 40 meters of rusty ladder to get from the water to the main deck of the derelict. No, what ended up being the most difficult task was opening any bulkhead door in sight. Liam sat stumped. He'd caught the name, at least. The Xinu, just visible in both Mandarin and English from the side of the vessel. The main deck was easy to traverse, as its cargo capacity was low and easily navigable. There was no telling how long the Xinu had been drifting at sea, but based off the level of degradation, it had to have been years. The usual multicolored crates were cast in a smear of brown rust, matching the rest of the ship's hull. The windows on the bridge were smashed in more than one place, and the radio tower had collapsed entirely. What seemed most confusing were the tents up top. Some crates appeared to have been removed to make room. Liam ascertained that perhaps 50 people had camped out right on the main deck of the ship, though it was difficult to tell as most of the fabric had disintegrated with time. Perhaps refugees? It was certainly within the realm of possibilities that this ship had left a war-torn country long ago, only to be abandoned on the shore of another. One wrong twist in the tides, and the Xinu could have been trapped at sea for decades without being seen. Liam had heard reports of that type of behavior from the Chinese government before. But then, why would the passengers leave their belongings behind? It seemed that they had left in a hurry, as there were the remnants of rotted food, half-empty luggage, trash piles, and clothes sprawled about. There were even tools available, with everything from hammers to screwdrivers to crowbars. Liam gasped. Oh, thirsty, I'm such an idiot. He'd been living alone for so long that he'd forgotten that other people could make other tools, and he could use those tools. He waltzed over to the most undamaged crowbar and gave it a spin. I guess we can get to the bottom of this mess, yet. With the added leverage of a crowbar in his hands, Liam was able to yank his way through a bulkhead door, straight into the bridge. An effluvia of rot immediately burst out from the screen of black. He coughed and withdrew a step, nearly passing out from the stench alone. Maybe we'll need a little more help, Liam decided. He had been sparse with his own equipment, and only had his high-altitude pilot outfit, thirsty, and a knife fashioned from flint. Anything more would have slowed his swim down. But fortunately, the prior residents of this ship had left a survivalist like Liam with a cornucopia of options. Within 5 minutes of preparation, he had a sustainable fire going, several torches at his disposal, some luggage to hold supplies, and an improvised spear. One never knew what to expect in an old vessel. Moving through the bridge of the Xianyujong filled his mind with more questions than answers. The source of the odor was immediate. The remnants of bloodstains splattered the walls, though no bodies were in sight, and it had oddly turned jet black. Pipes had been trashed and fluid was leaking, though he didn't know enough about ships to guess their identity. Any signs had been written in the ship's native Mandarin, adding another layer of complexity to an already enigmatic puzzle. He could hardly make heads or tails from any compartment in sight. Until he found the kitchen and its matching storage room a deck below. His stomach roared. Whatever had caused this derelict to form no longer mattered. The instant his eyes fell on this trove, he thought of nothing else. B1, Chapter 3, the Xianyujong, 2. The instant Liam's eyes fell on this trove, he thought of nothing else. Oats, rice, dried beans, pasta, lentils, dehydrated milk, peanut butter, honey, cans of vegetables, meat, fruit. And most importantly, bottled water. Gallons and gallons of it. Where could he even begin? Most of the goods would have to be tossed out of hand, but even then, there was more food in this one little room than Liam had ever collected in the entire time he'd been on purgatory. He could think of no greater version of heaven than locking the door and camping out here. Liam went straight for the peanut butter, not even bothering to check how many years past expiration it would be. A single thumb's worth later, and he almost had an orgasm on the spot. Liam closed his eyes and drifted back to fonder times. They say that peanuts were originally used by the Incas of Peru to aid their loved ones in the spirit world, and it's hard not to see why. Thirsty. Peanut butter is high in protein and monounsaturated fat, and is essential for anyone looking to get a large amount of energy in a short amount of time. In circumstances like ours, it might just be the difference between life and death. He reached for some spam next. What they don't tell you about canned foods is that the expiration date isn't half as important as the integrity of the can. Most toxicity comes from rusting of the metal and contamination of the contents inside, and not the degradation of the food itself. He sank his teeth into the meat, still edible in spite of the time. It's the acidity that can be otherwise dangerous. Notice how I'm not going for those canned beets? As much as I would love beets right now, the sugars inside would have most likely broken down and become inedible. Next, he went for rice. There's a story of a man who discovered a barrel of rice on a wreck outside Beijing, dating back to the early 1800s. The collapsed deck had applied pressure that created a vacuum inside the barrel, and so even though it had been on the bottom of the ocean for hundreds of years, it was still perfectly safe to eat, with all its carbohydrates and fiber intact. He shoved a handful in his mouth and shed a tear. Thankfully, we share similar luck. Liam reached for more food but paused. His hand quivered as he fought the urge. Now more than ever, he needed to deflect the thought. Refeeder syndrome is a well-known condition that's killed millions of people across the globe. He stood up and began funneling cans that met his standards into his empty bag. What happens is, during prolonged states of undernourishment, your body stops producing insulin, and instead burns fat and muscle. This creates an imbalance that affects metabolism drastically. Foods that are normally harmless begin to force your body to produce more insulin to overcompensate, at which point your electrolyte balance will be severely compromised. That can affect the heart, lung, kidney, even digestive system. Then you get more hungry in spite of eating more food, and the problem compounds itself until death. We can't have that. Thirsty, now can we? He paused, his bag filled. No, we can't. With his food and water supply secured, Liam delved deeper into the Xianyujong. Navigating the decks was difficult without understanding the language, but it wasn't long before he started to locate more supplies. New clothing found in a cabin was a welcome change from the pilot suit he'd been forced to wear since the crash, even if the cotton from civilian clothes itched after so much time out of use, and the pants was a size too large. Some of the lithium batteries he scavenged still held a charge, letting Liam swap his handmade torches for a flashlight. The real prize came from a locker in the engineering room. A waterproof GPS locator, built for just this kind of emergency. There'd be no way to get a signal this far below deck, and that was even if the electronics could still function after so much time on a derelict ship. And yet, Liam dared to dream big. He swapped the batteries in his flashlight back out for the GPS, went to the nearest window for a better signal, and activated the power. His heart skipped a beat. The screen flickered but for a moment before stabilizing. A few clicks past the Chinese characters in what he could only assume was the update message, and Liam was back in business. The screen went blank, and the little loading circle began to spin in the middle. And it spun. And spun. And spun. And right when Liam hit the cusp of certainty that it would never stop spinning, the screen darkened and the lights turned blue. There in front of his eyes, he could see a full maritime map, complete with longitude and latitude. Ha! Liam laughed. Looks like there are people out there after all, thirsty. He didn't need to know much about computers to know that a GPS wouldn't just work on its own. Of course his fears were ill-placed. How foolish had he been? Buoyed by the discovery, Liam switched off the GPS for later use and continued to search the XIN. This day had taken an extraordinary turn for the better. But then Liam thought he spotted another living human for a beat. Through the dust and grime on a nearby window, he caught the visage of a grown man with a long beard and streaks of grey throughout his hair. It wasn't until he drew close that he realized his window was no more than a mirror, and the spectre he had spotted was his own reflection. Closer still, and he could make out the familiar ridge of his nose and slant of his brow, but it had been distorted. His cheeks had grown gaunt, and his forehead was squeezed with wrinkles. Even his eyes had heavy bags below, and the deep, chestnut hue seemed to have faded after so much strain. It was funny how effectively a man could deceive himself. When spotting his reflection in a pool, Liam had perverted his appearance into the image he wanted, of the strong survivalist celebrity still in his youth. But faced against the truth, there was no way out of it. He was staring into an old, frail stranger. Not for the first time today, Liam blinked back the tears before they could spread. He still had more exploring to do, and there was too little time before returning to his raft would become impossible. Liam pieced more of the Xinu Jiang's puzzle back together to distract himself. One of the interior cargo holds had been sealed from the outside, and though it had not been initially apparent what the reason had been, some biohazard tape and the word sick inside scrawled hastily on one of the bulkhead doors gave Liam his answer. The dangers of infections worsened when traveling in close quarters, and there could be no better breeding ground for an outbreak than an overpopulated ship at sea. At least the crew had done well to solve their problem before evacuating. Even if he'd had the desire to brave a quarantined room for medicine, the various bulkheads had been locked, if not fused outright. Looks like we have our answer, thirsty, Liam decided. Our Chinese friends must have left in a hurry after discovering the outbreak. I just hope the passengers made it out without suffering too much damage. He turned to leave. The door thumped behind. Liam paused. For a moment, he stood in silence, his eyes locked on the bulkhead door. Had he just imagined the noise? The door thumped. It can't be. Liam swallowed the bile in his throat and leaned in. Thump. There was no denying it. This wasn't just the ominous sound of an old vessel fighting against currents. It was a deliberate, precise pound, just on the other side of this door. Something was in there. Thump. Now, that's strange, Liam said. Our cargo hold is most definitely sealed and, by the looks of the rust on the locks, I'd say it's been that way for as long as everywhere else. There'd be no way for any type of creature to work its way above or below, at least not anything large enough for this kind of noise. So that leaves us with an important question. He paused, his voice going somber as his usual showmanship failed. How can anything still be alive back there? Thump. A gurgling hiss followed. The hair raised on the back of Liam's neck. What concerned him wasn't the sound, but the source. He had climbed the Andes, traversed the Sahara, fought Siberian winters, lived in the Alaskan wild. He had survived in the most extreme conditions on every continent, and had more direct confrontations with predators of all stripes than any but a handful of others could say. And yet, he had never heard any sound quite like this. Thump. I think it's about time we leave, thirsty. We've gotten more than enough from here. We'd best get out of this place. Liam threw his luggage over his shoulder and moved to leave. He needed to go far, far away. B1, Chapter 4, An Unexpected Arrival, 1. So now you want computer programmers for a bioresearch lab. Look at the big picture, Director. We're no longer just breeding biomatter from the ground up. We're also programming it. Dr. Ava Sherman. Manchester, New Hampshire, 4 years before. It was the most beautiful thing that Liam had ever seen. Land. He'd spotted it first through GPS the night before, but had forced himself to sleep instead, lest all his efforts go to waste due to an ill-advised night landing. After weeks stuck on his hand-built raft, and an exponentially longer time stuck on an island, the sight of the solid earth stretching the length of the horizon was almost more than he could bear. A red sun cut through a malaise of navy and into a thin fog, only broken by the deep grey monoliths of downtown LA, and the even darker mountains on the cusp of sight. This early in the morning, the city was silent and the lights were out. But it was still there, standing. He pulled the mast free one last time, and made a break straight for Santa Monica's shore. There was no longer any need to conserve battery power from the GPS. The moment he'd hit land, it wouldn't matter in the slightest. Civilization was here. Oh, how this'd be a story to remember. Liam Fenix, survivalist extraordinaire, believed to have been dead for years, only to not only have survived alone through pure force of will, but to have then gone on and constructed a raft capable of traversing the better part of the North Pacific Ocean. He'd braved monsoons, fought back sharks, explored unknown derelicts. Getting back on the telly would be the least of his concerns. The wind picked up, and his raft shot straight for the shore. Liam could feel it all coming back his way. After so much time, and so much of his own life lost, he'd finally have the one resource returned that he had squandered in his youth. People. They had once meant so little to him. In truth, when him and Nellie had left Alaska and returned to civilization, Liam had only agreed to perform in his television series Survive in Wild in order to return to being as far away from people as humanly possible, as ironic of a personal statement that was to make. But after so much time in isolation, Liam could see how much of a fool he'd been. If he had one wish left other than to return to his family, it was to get in front of a crowd of people and talk to each and every single one of them. It didn't matter the subject. Only that he hear them and they hear him. His raft was almost there. Liam was no longer kilometers away, but in the hundreds of meters. It was happening. He was almost home. Closer still, and he could make out the nuances of the shore. That's odd, Liam thought. From a distance, it seemed to have been filled with umbrellas and towels, but that had been an illusion. Nothing but trash remained. Liam was nearly thrown from off his raft as it collided with sand. He'd been so focused on the beach that he'd lost track of his speed. The mast dislodged from the deck a moment later, forcing Liam to do out of reflex what inertia had only started. Part of him could have been upset about destroying his hand-built ship, but there seemed to be greater priorities afoot. Liam held his hands up high to block the rising sun and scanned the beach. There was nothing in sight but sand and trash. Even the nearby pier looked to be lifeless. Sure, it had been years, but if there was one place that always had some semblance of activity, it was the Santa Monica beach. Even this early in the morning, there should have been someone about, if for no other reason than to clean up all this trash. Where the hell is everybody? Liam turned to Thirsty. You know what I think, mate? Oftentimes, if there are chemical spills or red algae warnings, entire beaches will get evacuated and deemed unsafe for use. You know how California is. I'm thinking something like that must have happened here. Don't worry though, we aren't staying long. Let's just grab our things and move inland, yet. Liam filled his luggage with the essentials, slung Thirsty over his shoulder, and started walking. He wouldn't need canned food once he found some assistance, which of course would be soon, but part of him felt like it would be nice to have on hand. Just in case, as the saying went. Clearing the beach did little to resolve his unease. The street was barren save for a few vehicles, and by the dust and grime and rust that coated their shells, they looked to be entirely non-functional, and had been for years. And they weren't alone. There were vines on the buildings and windows were smashed, as if nothing had been in use around here for years and years. Just like the XINU Jong. Liam shook his head. Looks like Santa Monica has hit harder times than we thought, Thirsty? A real shame. This place once used to be so much more beautiful. But, cities change and so do the times. Let's just keep moving, yet. On that thought, Liam began the longer hike inland, using the main road as a guide. Downtown Santa Monica wasn't much improved. The shops were all closed, and what little evidence there had been of activity was now extinguished. Broken glass littered the ground, and whatever had once been valuable had long since been removed. With all the damage about, Liam could not say if this place was left by choice or force. Liam grinned through the angst. There's an island off the coast of Japan that had once been a sprawling metropolis of industry. Coal mining was the purpose, if I have my facts straight. But the government closed it down around the 1970s, and the people abandoned it, effectively turning an entire island into a ghost town. Decades later, one would think they had all been killed off had they stumbled upon it unawares, just like us. Climate change is my guess. You and I know a thing or two about that, mate? We've been feeling its effects for years. So that's what I think happened. If people realized that coastal resorts weren't an ideal place to invest in, then that would be bad for the local economy. Less tourists each year. Less revenue from the state. At a certain point, they'd have no choice but to all leave. That's how this went down, yet. He nodded, if not for Thirsty's benefit, then his own. Yes. There's no doubt that's what happened to Santa Monica. No doubt at all. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Liam moved deeper into the city, and faced nothing but more abandoned city. The houses were shuttered and strangled in vines, and the streets were empty, save for more rusted wrecks. There were no signs of life other than the occasional bird in the air or rat poking its head out of a gutter. But Liam did not want to let this setback slow him down, nor make him question his own sanity. Every oddity had an explanation, and for every argument for his unsaid fears, there'd be another more plausible one against. LA was filled with poverty and abandoned housing units. Maybe the economic crisis had finally caught up to this part of the city. No one was answering his calls for help because it was still too early. And even if it wasn't, he was certain that they'd all have better things to do than talk to some nutter wandering the streets. How foolish would Liam feel the second he came across that first car? Each step began to grow heavy as the exhaustion of the exercise caught up with him. By the time he discovered his first dead body, he almost lost his strength entirely. But still, Liam persisted. He stopped bothering to justify everything in sight and decided to focus on the newfound wildlife instead. What an interesting breed of vine to have growing around here. The birds in the windows didn't seem to be native to the region, which made their migration pattern all the more fascinating. Those dogs that kept fleeing were acting as if he was the superior predator, and not them. So much for man's best friend. What could that mean for the conditioning they'd developed? On and on, Liam spoke to Thirsty to report his findings. Half of the stories and facts he passed on were being made up on the spot, but that was part of the production. He couldn't just leave an explanation half-finished because he'd mucked up a detail or two. Where would be the fun in that? That's what he was having, wasn't it? Fun. This was all just another brilliant adventure. Another story that everyone would love to hear about, the moment he found someone to tell. Oh, that's strange, Liam said when he came across a freeway. I seem to have lost my bearings. But yes, I'm quite positive now. That's the 405 right there. That's what that is. He paused. It's a bit unusual. In all my time living around here, it's never once been. I've not once seen that road EMP. He could not finish the thought. Liam swallowed the bile in his throat. You know, back in the 1930s, there was a major public works project, but even then, he couldn't muster the strength to continue. Why the bloody hell is the 405 empty? Of all the places, of all the roads in the city. If there ever was a single place on this earth incessantly backed up in traffic, it was the 405. How many times had he missed an appointment because of that hell-forsaken road? He looked to Thirsty, still sitting numbly in his hand. And here I am, talking to a fucking canteen. Thirsty plummeted to the ground. Like water through a cracked dam, the truth of his circumstances burst through. His horror had been unearthed. His nightmare reborn. That primordial, subconscious fear that he had buried during all his years on purgatory. The one that had driven him so hard to leave that very place and strive for answers as to why nobody ever came. There are no people here because there are no people left. Concise, simple, and without evidence to the contrary. The tears rushed down his cheeks. It wasn't fair. He had only wished to take a break from it all. It had never been his intention to leave them entirely. How could he have known that the world would end just because he did a lap around the globe? And so Liam cried. And cried. And cried. For once, he did not wish to stop the tears, or find some second wind of resolve to keep pressing onward. There was no need. No hope could be found here. A door crashed open behind. B1, Chapter 4, An Unexpected Arrival, 2. A door crashed open behind. Liam flew into attention as somebody else hobbled into view, out from a half-collapsed home. He froze in place, his eyes widened against the sight of the figure moving towards him. Though humanoid and in the shape of a man, its movement was feral and instinctive, its clothes rotted beyond recognition, and skin gray and peeling. The hair was stringy and whitened, and sores covered its scalp. Its mouth clattered hungrily as it stumbled, and it raised a mangled arm his way. Even the veins were subhuman. They were black and bulging, like a corpse half decomposed. But it was the eyes more than anything that made Liam flinch. They were white. Blank. Empty. It was as if the life had been drained from its very sockets, leaving behind only a vacuous hole where a human had once been. The creature hissed, and Liam's world shattered anew. He had heard that noise before. On the Xinujong. It all made sense now. A contagion that could reduce people into a state like this. Such a force levied against civilization would be one they could not hope to win. Humanity lost. Its strengths, its virtue, its muster. Could this really have been their end? Liam stumbled back. First a few steps, and then a few more. His foot nicked something hard and he tumbled back into the ground. He could not run and he could not stand. He could only inch further away from this monster, the fear and uncertainty crippling him against doing anything else. Another person walked into sight. Before the monster could respond, a hammer was slammed through its skull. It fell limp. Well, someone else said from behind, his voice raspy. Looks like we got ourselves astray. A group of 3 survivors stood behind. Each was wrapped in heavy clothes in spite of the weather. Cargo pants were tucked into boots, with beige dusters hanging above. Their hands were gloved and gripping weapons, both guns and blades. Even their faces were covered in cloth and hoods, with tinted goggles above. Only one stood out from the others. Where his companions were similar in aesthetics, he had leather padding as added protection around his arms, and each was laced with spikes. He held a battle axe, large enough to use as a walking stick, with a pistol strapped to his waist. He took a step forward. What's the matter? Never seen a hollow before. His voice was deep and gruff, as though he'd spent a lifetime smoking cigarettes. Liam opened his mouth, but found no words. You sure this guy's one of us, Spike, the one who had killed the monster asked, her voice still hoarse, yet more feminine. Of course he is, Camilla. You all heard him. She shrugged. Don't know what I heard. Could be a drake. I could use the boost, either way, another said with that same gruff hue. It'd be quick. Oh, shut up, Rocco. You just ate yesterday. Spike waved his gloved hand. Enough, or I swear, I'll purge you both. He leaned into Liam. You're not starved, are you? You can talk. Why yes, Liam said. I'm not like that thing. He nodded. There. What did I say? We got ourselves another one, fresh from the factory. Still got the stutters and everything. The last of their group walked over. With a gloved hand, he grabbed Liam's cheeks and examined them, one side to the other. Don't think this guy's a reetzer, he said. What the hell are you talking about, Damien? Rocco asked. Look at his eyes. They look alive. Liam stared, confused. Of course I'm alive. At once, all of them took a step back, their weapons raised. Liam gasped. What the hell are you doing? I said I'm alive. But they did not move. If we've got ourselves a living human here, Damien said. Do you have any idea what this means? Spike turned his head an inch. Big payday from Hades, that's for damn sure. More than that, Rocco said, elated. Any of you ever have human before? Are you kidding me, Rocco? You'll get us all hunted with talk like that. No one would ever know. The group began bickering as Liam lay in place. They kept arguing whether to keep him for themselves, or trade him to someone else. What was happening? Why wouldn't anyone give him a clear answer? Please, Liam begged. I don't know who you are or what you want, but I promise you, I'm a living, breathing human, and I just need a little help, yet. AHRMPH spilled out from beneath Spike's mask. You really don't know, do you? What, been stuck on an island or something the past decade? Well, actually, Liam said. That's exactly what happened. Ha. Who would have guessed? Looks like we got ourselves the star from Castaway. Liam laughed. Yes, yes. Exactly like the movie Castaway. Thank God you found me. To that, Spike leaned in. Oh, I wouldn't be so sure of that if I was you. He removed his goggles and lowered his mask. Liam's heart stopped in his chest. Spike's face was as grey and rotted as the monster they had killed, and a long set of scars ran across his cheeks. But unlike the hollow, his irises were filled, and projected a red, demonic glare that was anything but human. What's the matter? Spike mocked. Don't look so excited to see me anymore. He laughed, yellowed teeth bared against blackened gums. Think you might be right, Rocco. I've never had living before. Maybe we should hack off one of those pretty little arms and have a taste. Again, Liam was speechless. What could he say? What could anyone say in such a circumstance? Suddenly, more trash crashed as another monster stumbled into the street. This one looked more recognizable, with a feminine frame below a sheepskin jacket and a pair of faded jeans. The face was hidden beneath a hood, but there was no denying the erratic movement and deep hiss that was characteristic of the hollow before. Spike grunted. Come on, Camilla. Let's not have any more distractions. She started to wander over. I swear, I have to do everything around here. Camilla drew close, hammer raised. But as she swung her weapon, her target danced to the side and threw its hood down. Black hair was tied into a bun, contrasted against a burgundy scarf that covered her face from nose to neck. The woman drew a pistol with an oversized suppressor and pressed it into Camilla's face. Oh, Camilla started, but the shot went off before she could finish. She fell lifeless into the pavement. The others screamed and took aim with their own weapons, but the woman was quicker, and brought down Damien and Rocco before they could respond, each with bullets to the head. Only Spike was able to return fire. The woman flinched when her shoulder took a hit, but she otherwise ignored the blow entirely. Spike hooped as his own pistol got shot out of his hand, then rushed for safety. The woman advanced and kept shooting. Blackened ichor burst free as different parts of Spike's body were struck, but he shrugged off the hits as though they were nothing. With one final lunge, he vaulted over a fence and out of view. The woman closed in, and again Liam found himself at a loss. Her skin was pale and smooth above the scarf, but her irises were shrouded in a strong, magenta gleam contrasted against black mascara. Thank you, Liam said. He tried to hold a hand up to shake, but she waved him off. It's true then, you're alive, she asked, her voice as deep and hoarse as everyone else he'd heard today. Yes, Liam said. Why does everyone keep asking me that? Good. Let's get out of here then. Wait. Who are you? Or better yet, what are you? My name is Leah, and I'd suggest you follow me. B1, Chapter 5, Hollowed Earth, 1. Saw the strangest thing today, sir. One of the infected turned and ran away, almost like she still had a mind of her own. Don't let wishful thinking get in the way of shooting them all on sight. You heard the brass. There's nothing in there. Colonel Tom Murray. Reno, Nevada. 14 days after. Well, this day had taken a turn. Leah had returned to her beach again, only to discover a crashed raft that had never been there before, along with a set of footprints. A few hours later and she had tracked the prints to their owner, killed another crew of hunters, and found a live human, the one she'd dreamed about. Who would have ever thought that such a day would come? Liam Fenix. That's what the human called himself. Leah never quite understood why they had 3 names, but only ever used 2. What was the point of the third, and what would happen if he ran into another Liam Fenix? At least there weren't enough Reetzers in the world for Leah to worry about coming across another Leah. Then again, she supposed that there were even less living, breathing humans around these days. Please, Liam Fenix said between steps, his throat heavy. For Christ's sake, slow down. Leah slackened her pace, but kept her eyes fixed forth. She needed to think. What the fuck had she done? This wasn't like stealing a dreg or hacking off a limb during a turf war. Hell, this was worse than hunting another hunter. Leah had purged Spike's entire crew. 3 full deaths at once, well within the boundaries of outer pandemonium, all over a capture that wasn't even hers. This one wouldn't pass without reprisal. But then again, what choice had she had? With the way they were talking, the human wouldn't have survived 5 minutes in their hands. Spike was a meathead who could barely contain himself, let alone his crew. Could she really have let him just waltz off with a find this significant? Hunter's honor only went so far when the stakes were this high. Leah dug her nails into her palms. Shouldn't have let him get away. Spike was the real mistake. Limping his way back to pandemonium would drain him hard, but there was no telling if it'd be enough, or if Hades wouldn't be able to put the pieces back together anyway. Whatever leverage Leah might have gained here would be lost the moment that knowledge of her attack trickled its way back to him. There was no way out of it. For better or worse, Leah had made her decision. All she could do now was prepare for what came next. Doesn't that hurt? Liam Fenix asked. Leah looked to her shoulder and remembered that she'd been shot. Blood still leaked from the wound, staining her sheepskin jacket in a darker shade of black. She'd have to remember to get the jacket cleaned and stitched. It had been a bitch to come by. No, she said. You sure? That's a lot of, whatever that is coming out. Leah supposed that she should check. She gave her injured fist a squeeze. The movement was sluggish. Must have nicked a nerve ending. No wonder she'd missed the kill shot on Spike, though she could be thankful that her res wouldn't be touched by this one. Too little damage. Doesn't matter, Leah said. It'll be fine. He sighed. If you insist. What was it with the living and their voices? Liam Fenix sounded as though he'd inhaled a tank of helium. It was so soft and nasally. There was also his appearance. His skin had that even, beige sheen characteristic of his kind, and he had those dark chestnut eyes without a drop of red. His brown hair might have been long and unkempt, but it was still greasy and full. Add that to the flask thrown over his shoulder and torn bag filled with canned food, and he might have looked like a savage by human standards, but that still put him worlds apart from anyone they'd run into in Pandemonium. And all of this came before the smell. Leah's tongue salivated to the mere sense of his presence. It'd been ages since she'd experienced the hunger like this, and she wouldn't be alone. Another problem. Another worry. How the hell was Leah going to keep this under wraps? At least tell me where we're going, Liam Fenix asked. Somewhere safe, she said. Where's that? Close. He paused. So that's it. You're really not going to tell me anything else? What is the plan here? Leah said nothing. I'll tell you when I figure it out. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The two reached her current hideout, and not a second too soon. Liam Fenix collapsed into a wall for air. Whoops. She'd forgotten how much difficulty the living had with long distances. At this rate, they'd never get anywhere. Leah scanned up and down the street. She had chosen well for their current camp, at least, using a 3-story townhouse, with only the roof of the uppermost floor partially caved in, and a balcony with an intact railing. The sandstone walls had plenty of holes to peer through, and with the extra height, they were able to see anyone else coming for miles. All right, Liam Fenix said. I've indulged your silence enough. What are we doing here? Meeting some friends, Leah said. She went for the door and knocked, timing her beat to match the code she'd come up with. After an irritating pause, the door opened a crack and a pair of tinted orange shades stared out. What's the password, sweetheart? Buttercup asked. Leah sighed. Open the door or I'll shove a grenade up your ass and pull the pin. Seriously, we've got company. He raised an eyebrow at the sight of Liam Fenix standing behind, then unfastened the locks. As the final latch came free, Leah kicked the door open and went straight upstairs with Buttercup and Liam Fenix struggling to keep pace. Getting everyone up to speed was going to be an uphill battle, especially given the bombshells she'd be dropping. Is everyone here? Leah asked. Buttercup nodded. Yet. Mastermind's reading in the study and Kit's recasing ammo in the kitchen. Good. Get everyone together. Leah marched into the living room and went for a closet. With any luck, they might still have some relics from the past. Light washed over as she crossed the cracks where it leaked through the walls, reminding her that the sun had crossed its apex and there was now less daylight coming than had already passed. She was definitely on the clock with this one. Traveling at night under these constraints was foolish at best, and she dared not wait until tomorrow to act. When Leah had collected enough scraps of history, everyone had already gathered. Her crew surrounded Liam Fenix, each talking over each other as they studied the aberration she'd brought back. Well, that's one problem solved. Mastermind seemed to have deduced the truth of the human's existence fast enough, though that was no surprise. Liam Fenix stood in the middle of it all, dumbstruck. Unlike Leah, neither Mastermind nor Kurt went to lengths to cover their marks, and with their bright red irises focused onto his, he was no doubt going through whatever emotions that humans went through when their world was turned upside down. Then he noticed Leah standing in front, silent as ever. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came free. Everyone, quiet. Leah ordered. She held out her hand and tossed the papers she'd collected. Dust puffed out where they landed. You want answers, Liam Fenix? You'll find them in here. He rifled through the newspapers. Ian warns of deadly contamination leaked, one said. East Coast nuked, government still silent, another said. He began to scan the articles more erratically as the collapse of his world became more and more apparent. He barely looked at the dead rise, or CDC memo leaked, more nukes coming, but did fixate on signs of contagion now in 20 countries. Ever hear of a zombie apocalypse? Leah asked. Your civilization was all about glorifying it, whether through your books or TV shows or games. You all dreamed of a world where the dead rose to feast on the flesh of the living in the hopes that you could find personal glory there. Well, that's what the Hallowing was, an undead pandemic, the likes of which this world had never seen. Liam Fenix shuffled the pages in front of him, as if they had some hidden meaning he could not crack. They would have fought it. Contained it. Surely, someone would have figured something out. Leah leaned in. The sad truth is that none of you ever stood a chance. Sure, it's easy to sit around and imagine how much of a badass you'd be, but most of you ended up dying before you even knew it was happening. The very networks of globalization that had connected you only hastened your demise. The Hallowing spread like wildfire, and within the first few months alone, not even 1 in 100 of you were still alive. The majority had either gone hollow or been killed by your governments, if not both. It was only a matter of time before the rest of you went too. He still stared at the newspapers, but he was no longer bothering to read. Leah tapped her gloved hands on the table, her eyes locked into his. But I'm not telling you anything you hadn't figured out already, am I? Humanity and its world-encompassing civilization is gone, and only the undead remain. What your kind never imagined in all your visions of an apocalyptic, zombie-infested world was that humanity's demise wouldn't be where the story ended. Not all hollows stayed the empty husks they turned into. Some of them regained their intelligence. Their souls began to fill back up, even if their old lives were gone forever. To that, he looked at her. What are you? Don't play stupid. You know the answer, even if you can't bring yourself to say the words. We are the hollows who didn't stay empty. We are the ones who came back. Only then did Liam Fenix seem to notice the others again. You're telling me that you're a group of zombies? That the only ones left are all undead? We call ourselves Reetzers. Leah smiled below her scarf. Welcome to the present. B1, Chapter 5, Hollowed Earth, 2. Liam Fenix sat and stared at her for a moment, but then his throat clogged up and he started to gag. Leah raised an eyebrow when she realized what was about to happen. Best you take that outside. In a flash, the human lurched from his seat and ran for the balcony. Vomit spewed forth as he leaned over the railing. All things considered, not the worst reaction to have. Kurt waddled over to bring him a towel, but Leah waved him back. Give him a minute, she said before again looking to her own crew. We've got our own things to clear up, hey. Leave this puzzle to me, comrades, Mastermind said, stroking his tiny chin to accentuate the point. It would appear that this living legacy has just come to learn of the hollowing that felt his kindred. But how could that be? Humans were social by their very nature. So much time has passed for him to be merely oblivious. He grinned. Well, is this not an obvious deduction? Our friend must have been isolated before the outbreak with no means of return, perhaps marooned on an uninhabited island. His red eyes beamed. Is that the solution, Mum? That's what he told me, Leah acknowledged. Of course Mastermind would crack this open without a second thought. Though he'd only been a child when he'd hollowed and therefore had a little boy's body to match, his res was brimming with Mensa-level intellect, the kind that most old-world PhD holders never got to obtain. Mastermind tittered and rubbed his little tufts of black hair. How marvelous. What an incredible find you've gotten for us. Doesn't look like this one came for free, Kurt said. He gave Leah's wounded shoulder a poke with his meaty hand. Who did this? Where Mastermind was sized too small, a case could be made that Kurt had hollowed too big. Well over 6 feet tall and 250 pounds in weight, there weren't many that could survive a blow from his sledgehammer, not without getting cleaved in half. It was a shame that the hollows had given him so many marks. Between his torso and face, he had more than a dozen, with one even claiming an eye, though he wrapped cloth around his bald head to cover the wound. Leah grimaced. It was Spike. I'll explain more later, but let's just say that he's doing worse than me. Buttercup laughed. Can't say I ever liked the asshole. Sometimes Leah could swear that Buttercup was secretly human. He'd found a leopard print to go with the cream fedora he'd started wearing, and between the tanner he put into his skin and product for his hair and mustache, he'd pass more easily as one than even Liam Fenix. Were it not for his burgundy eyes or the mark he kept hidden below his shirt, she might never know for certain. What the hell are you wearing this time? Leah asked. He gleamed. I keep telling you, I'm pretty sure that I was a porn star in my living days. You know how many of these things fit like they were custom tailored for me? Too many, that's for sure. Change. We're heading out soon. Oh, come on, Leah. I've barely broken the fucker in and you already want me to toss it in a roller like it's an old pair of shoes. I'll burn it if I have to. We've got more important things to worry about. Mastermind cut in. Speaking of, my friends. I believe the human will cease his retching soon. This begs a question best answered candidly while he remains out of our company. What are we to do with him next? He looked to Leah. Fair enough, Buttercup said. You know I was just playing, right? Of course you are calling the shots here, Leah. Yeah, boss, Kurt echoed. You're the one who found him. You'll have our backs. Kurt, Mastermind, Buttercup. Leah's crew. She'd picked them up at one point or other over the years, and they'd been inseparable ever since. But for all her prowess and expertise, there were some problems she'd never been prepared for, or even considered as anything other than a passing fantasy. To say that finding a living human was one of those moments was the understatement of the century. Everyone was looking to her for answers, and she had none to give. Oh, how leadership sucked. Liam Fenix walked back into the room, his beard caked in vomit, and eyes still watered. I'm sorry. I know that you saved my life, but this is a lot. He laughed bitterly. I always knew that the world would have changed, but let's just say that I never expected this. I want to thank you for saving me but there's something else I need to know. The newspapers rustled as he picked one up. You see. This is dated 2 days after my plane went down. An odd coincidence, yet? It makes me wonder, he paused. How long? Leah stared him in the eyes. 12 years have passed since the hollowing. No one's seen a living human for the past 7. He fell silent as he considered the reality of his return. At least Leah could answer this honestly. She was among the oldest Reetzers around, and perhaps one of the first to ever be reincarnated. 12 years of her existence had passed since then. 12 long years of survival, with none of them easy, as she had been forced to do the unspeakable just to keep her res stable a few days more. I understand, Liam Fenix said with a tone that would not be challenged. Is that so? Leah was expecting him to scream, or cry again, or attempt to take his own life on the spot. Humans were like that. They valued their own existence less than the world they'd known before. How many had she seen go that way? But Liam Fenix was different. He'd heard that civilization had been destroyed, and that all he'd come to love was no more, and that this new world was nothing but hostile for his kind. And yet, none of this seemed to deter him. If anything, he looked ready to face the challenge. So what do we do now? He asked, his head held high. Here it was. Her moment to choose. All eyes were on Leah, and she needed to have an answer. Dare she risk it all? We're returning to Pandemonium, she decided, and we need you to come with us. This world is still dying, and you're the only one who can save us. Me? What can I do? Leah clenched her fists, her own spirit buoyed. A nation built by corpses can only ever produce more corpses, but life can endure forever. Make no mistake, Liam Fenix. You might be the last man to walk this earth, she paused. But that makes you the most important one who's ever lived. B1, Chapter 6, The Pit, 1. As per the report, we believe that the initial team was exposed when an unsecured petri dish allowed the raw culture to briefly aerosolize between the laboratory and the incinerator. The end of the world, all because someone forgot to tighten a lid. What a joke. General John Tyson. Washington, D.C. 47 hours after. Couldn't let her win. Had to keep moving. That bitch had really done a number on Spike. As he stumbled through Tartarus with blood leaking from his wounds, he thought of all the ways that he would dismember her. So long as he could keep her in his res, she'd get what was coming. Spike concentrated. Leah, Leah, Leah. It had all happened so fast, but he knew that fucking scarf anywhere. Most of Pandemonium did. Leah was the legend that every hunter wanted to be. Unlike Mother and Hades and all the other veterans who'd retreated behind the sticks the moment it'd been built, Leah still hunted. She wandered the wastes, doing the dirty business that the rest of them needed to keep the wheels of the world spinning another day longer. There was a point after Spike left Xander's crew that he'd consider joining hers instead of making his own. Who wouldn't want to hunt with Leah? But not anymore. Clearly, her rep was built on a bed of lies. That bitch had purged his entire crew. Also she could keep the human to herself. Xander hadn't been lying when it came to her. Leah the Righteous was just like every other scumbag out there, ready to hack a fellow hunter to pieces the second they got the chance. Spike could still see the faces of his friends too. Camilla, Rocco, Desmond. No, wait. Fuck. Damien. That was his name. Damien. He'd been the newest to the team, after they'd lost that other guy to a hollow herd. Then again, who the hell was that? Spike grunted, and more ichor spilled onto the pavement. He was worse off than he thought. Re-hollowing was setting in fast, and the stutters would be back with a force at this rate. He had to move faster. Hades would be his best shot. No one else would lift a finger for him now. Spike reached Elysium just as the sun began its descent. Like most of the other shit that humans had built around here, Elysium was an old-world architectural fetish, with its buildings all linked together by sharp edges, and the one in the middle leaned way out in the courtyard like it was about to fall over any second. Hades had long since changed whatever bright colors it had before with a solid matte black coat, filled the central fountain with rotted blood, and replaced any trees in sight with skulls on pikes. But it was the purple, neon lights at the top that really caught the eye, spelling out the word Elysium for all of Pandemonium to see. The ultimate lure. Spike limped forth. Like all other hours of the day, there was a line gathered that stretched into the nearby street, with a troop of guards managing the crowd and collecting covers at the front. No surprise, really. Everyone was ready to kill just to get inside Elysium's walls. He shook his head and shoved his way through the line, ignoring the bitching of those nearby. A dark-skinned guard with half his face missing held up a hand. You know the drill. Back of the line. This can't wait, Spike said. I've got business with Hades. Oh? And who's he supposed to be expecting? Spike grunted and flipped open his duster. More viscera spilled from where he'd been shot. Can't you tell I've been drained? I've gotta see him now. Put out a contract, someone hissed from behind. I've been waiting for over 3 hours. For fuck's sake. Spike roared. I didn't get mugged in some back alley shithole. This happened outside the sticks. Maybe you shouldn't have been wandering outside, another asshole sneered. Spike was about to rip someone's arm off. The lack of respect was almost more than he could bear. He drew his badge, a wolf skull crossed with bones and cast in silver. See this? Means I'm a hunter. Back the fuck off, all of you, or I'll make sure Hades knows every single one of the assholes who got in my way. A circle formed as some of the crowd took his threat seriously, but the dark-skinned fucker still stayed in place. Getting shot doesn't give you a free pass. Report through proper channels and we'll look into it. It's not who shot me that matters, but what they did it over. And what's that? Spike grinned. Nope. Not for your ears, grunt. This goes straight to Hades and no one else. These peons needed to know their place. The guard softened a beat. Hope this is important. You know how the boss gets when his time's been wasted. Oh, he'll let me grind you into paste after hearing what I have to say. Spike winked. Think I'll be fine. The guard stepped aside. We'll send a runner to let him know. With a nod over his shoulder, another rushed inside. Spike hobbled after. Elysium had been a giant convention center before the Hallowing, where rich humans gathered around to show off all the bullshit they'd created. Each building had convertible interiors that allowed for wide-scale renovations. Whatever galleries and showrooms the humans had used them for, Hades had gone to lengths to change the entire place into a never-ending social venue. 8 to 10 floors a pop, with everything from dance halls to fight clubs to drug dens to gambling rooms to rage pits. Every wall was laced with strobe lights, and every corner had an LCD screen playing some old-world shit. The walls quaked to the beat of the music, only breaking for the cries and howls of reizers letting loose. There wasn't an inch of floor that stayed cast in the same color for more than a few seconds, as the neon lights constantly melded between reds and blues and greens and purples. The further into Elysium one went, the deeper into the pit of depravity they'd end up. No one could complain. Reizer life was shit, and if it wasn't for Hades, they'd all be tearing each other to pieces. Spike walked by a lust hall, and his tongue salivated to the noise. The dens were the real winner here. Hades had come up with all sorts of mind-bending Reizer drugs over the years, and each unlocked some missing part of their human physiology that they'd lost after Hallowing. Lust was the preferred crowd favorite. It did something that made their sex organs feel like they were working again, and from what Spike had experienced, it made him wonder why humans ever did anything else. He'd also done his share of gluttony, which was the only thing out there that truly sated the hunger, along with pride, which gave a rush like there was no tomorrow. Then there was wrath as the preferred favorite of fighters before duking it out. Envy and greed looked fun too. He'd heard that they made the mind feel like it was made of clouds. Nothing could beat sloth on that front, though Spike would never touch it in a million years. Made users look like they'd drained their own res. Of course, all of those drugs only accelerated Hallowing, and had to be taken in moderation. Spike had lost some real good memories by spending too much time in Elysium. He limped onward, ignoring the lure of everything in sight. Re-Hallowing was getting rough, and he could feel his mind starting to slack. Unless he got good care soon, he'd be back in the stutters. Spike entered Hades Hall, built at the heart of the central building of Elysium. Something about walking into it always made his neck tighten. The room had supposedly once been a conference hall, but Hades had gutted the audience seats to make room, and placed his throne on the stage. Gargoyles set to the sides, the seat had been padded with fabric in the color of blood, and between the supports and stands, there wasn't a spot of his throne that hadn't been carved into skulls or bones. The walls weren't much better, as they were laced with spikes and crimson banners to match the aesthetic, at least where there weren't more fluorescent lights poking from the ceiling. The hollow pit in the middle was what really made Spike flinch. Dug into the foundation perhaps 20 feet down, a group of body-starved hollows were chained to the walls, forming a ring that forced them to stare at each other as they stood for all eternity. It was said that people who crossed Hades worked their way down there. Spike gave the pit a real wide berth. Well, his host beckoned, if it isn't one of our hardest hunters, bleeding all over my hall. There he was, the bastard himself. Lord of the underworld, founder of pandemonium, and leader of Reizer culture, Hades. B1, Chapter 6, The Pit, 2. Where most tried to retain their human appearance, Hades had embraced the Hallowing entirely. His skin was shriveled where it hadn't peeled off, and his nose was missing entirely. His eyes poked out from between wilted eyelids, their irises burning with a scarlet intensity that Spike had never seen from anyone else. Hades had donned a biker's jacket today, loaded with all sorts of extra buttons and zippers to match his iconic barbed gloves that stretched past his wrists. He held out his hands and grinned. You still with us, or did you go hollow on me? Spike fell to one knee. Sorry, my lord. Been a rough day. Can the formalities. I've got shit I want to do other than sit here and listen to your problems. Spike explained what had happened. How they'd been out on a hunt and thought they'd come across a stray, but it had turned out to be a living human, which they would have of course taken straight back to the city had Leah not shown up and offed them first. Hades walked the hall in silence as Spike spoke, poking this and that as the story came out. If Spike hadn't known better, he'd think that he wasn't being listened to at all. So here's what I'm hearing, Hades said when he was finished. It sounds like you got your ass handed to you by a girl half your size. Not exactly something our hunters ought to have on their resume. Spike furrowed his brow. She got the jump on us. Give me some men and I'll bring her and the human right to your lap, kicking and screaming. He laughed. They used to have a saying for this. Throwing good money after bad. Maybe you're not as tough as you think, and I ought to be talking to her instead. He can't be seriously taking her side? Spike closed his eyes. This was classic Hades, trying to bait him into weakness. Spike matched his stare. You know that once word gets out about this, nobody's gonna deal with her. Besides, I've been thinking all day, and I've got a plan for what you can do to the human. This'll be fun to hear. Spike licked his lips. This was his moment. His time to shine. If there ever was a chance for him to get ahead in this world, it would be here and now. Way I figure it, most Reizers have never even seen a real human. It's easy for you to not think this is a big deal. You were around when they were. But for most of us here, we've either only heard the stories or just looked at them through pics. There's a difference between that and the real deal, and if there's one thing pandemonium craves, it's that authenticity of seeing where we came from in the flesh. It'll give us hope. And that's where the power is. You string this guy up in a cage and charge for the service of looking at him, and you'll have everyone paying out the ass. Sure, you might run this city like a well-oiled machine, but think of how many hunters and bosses and workers keep their distance from these walls. Think of how many more would brave the wastes for something this significant. This isn't just a lost album or a new pill to pop. We're talking real profit. The kind that'll make it so nobody ever questions your rule again. Spike took a step forth. And I'd be there to run security. That's all I'd ask from you. You let me be your lead man on this, and I'll make sure nobody gets near the merchandise. Not ever. Hades stared at one of the gargoyles and said nothing. The silence dragged until Spike felt antsy. Had he overplayed his hand on this one? It was a great idea. The best he'd ever thought of, and one that he knew would pay off. But the longer that time passed, the more he felt like his pitch hadn't landed. Suddenly, Hades turned and grinned. Gotta say, brilliant fucking idea. You mean it, boss? Hell yeah. Like you say, going this route and we'd have ourselves a printing press of pics. Can't deny it'd work, partner. Spike let out of a sigh of relief. The way that Hades had said partner filled him with a stronger rush than he could ever get from a jab of pride. This was it. Hades walked over and grabbed Spike by the shoulder, just past the spikes that he always laced onto his duster. With a lurch, Hades dragged him across the room, right next to the pit of hollows. Their moans spilled out as they made eye contact. Guess I won't be needing this anymore to keep people in line, Hades said. Not when we'll be slinging shit this heavy. Spike swallowed the bile in his throat. He really hated the way these hollows shifted in unison. Don't worry about Leah either, Hades said. I'll get some guys and bring her in while you get patched up. You've done enough. He leaned in. But there's one thing I gotta know first, partner. This living human you found. You didn't tell anyone else about him, did you? Wouldn't want to start this project without knowing who the competition might be. Spike shook his head. Of course not, Hades. I'd never go behind your back. He smiled. I believe you. Before Spike knew what had hit him, he was tumbling below. His back smashed against the floor of the pit and the hisses of hollows erupted around. Oops, Hades said above. Guess my fingers slipped. Shit, fuck. Spike cursed. Get me the hell out of here. The hollows began clawing at Spike. He floundered away from the nearest one, only for another to grab him from behind. No matter which way he turned, there was another at his back trying to rip a chunk of flesh off. Spike punched one in the face. Stop, you fucking idiots. I'm not food. The hollows kept reaching for him, their eyes empty slates. Seriously, Hades, Spike cried out. Hurry up. But Hades had laid down on the edge of the pit like he was watching the sunset. It's really something, isn't it? The hunger drives you to do all sorts of crazy shit. I once saw a dreg chew off his own arm because he'd thought it was part of the corpse he was eating. Why the hell was Hades just sitting there? Spike tried to kick another free, but his leg had gone limp. One of the hollows had bit a chunk from his thigh before spitting out the corrupted flesh, and the tendons had been shredded. I always liked you, Spike, Hades said, still laying in place. You were a good soldier, and an even better hunter. Oh well, times change. Blah blah blah, nature of the universe and all that. Motherfucker. He's really leaving me in here. Spike understood why Hades kept this pit now. It wasn't for a show. The way he'd arranged the hollows, anyone who fell in wouldn't be able to climb or fight their way out. There were too many of them and they were too tightly packed. Hades feigned gratitude. Hey, now. Don't beat yourself up too hard, kid. It was a good idea. A real knockout of the park. If this whole thing was about bringing in the pics, then you and I would be making something special right now. His smile dissolved. But it's not. Another slab of meat got ripped from Spike's neck. He opened his mouth to shout, but only blood spurted free. What the fuck was Hades doing? The bastard had gone feral. Hades tapped the walls of the pit. That's the real shame about it. The very thing that makes your idea so good is why I can't let it happen. Like you said, you get any reanimated corpse with no future other than returning to the place they'd come, and you shove a living relic of the world that could have been in front of their noses, and they'll all have that same fucking thing on their mind. Hope. That's a problem, and a big one at that. He sighed. So here's what I think I'm gonna do, Spike. I'm gonna look this guy in the eyes and see how I feel. And if it's anything good for me, then I suppose that'll be bad for him, hey. He laid on his back and clasped his hands. Of course, that still leaves Leah floating around, but she's a smart enough girl. She'll know where to stand. And if she doesn't? Well, you get the idea. Just have to buy myself time. Spike swung this way and that, no longer worrying about whether his limbs would survive the day. Someone would come by and stop this. They had to. He just had to keep the hollows away from his head until then. So long as they didn't touch his brain, he'd keep his res intact. Then there was nothing but black as teeth-pierced bone. B1, Chapter 7, Welcome to Pandemonium, 1. We have identified an overproduction of neuropeptide Y in the hypothalamus, more than triple the levels of the average adult at their peak. In plain English, Doc. No matter how much they eat, the infected will never, ever feel satisfied. Dr. Ava Sherman. Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado. 2 months after. Would this nightmare ever end? Liam kept waiting for the moment. He kept expecting to wake up in his shelter on Purgatory and realize that this was all a concussion-induced hallucination. He wanted to hear the sound of waves hitting sand, and see the wind rustling through palm trees, and taste the sea air on his tongue. Was isolation really so dour when compared to this? How much further? Liam asked, more to keep his mind busy than to use the information for anything. It wasn't like they bothered listening to a word he said. Close, Leah answered without even bothering to turn. We'll meet up with Mother once we get situated. She's a scientist who knows more about the hollowing than anyone else. Liam gawked. One of them is called Mother now? Don't worry, Kurt said. We'll keep you safe. The mobile refrigeration unit he was dragging cracked open with a bump in the street, and a portion of its acrid contents slipped free, once again reminding Liam that his companions were dragging a half-dozen animal carcasses, and not just him. How had he found himself in the company of this lot? These creatures? It had only been a few hours since the state of the world had been explained to him, and already Liam regretted ever choosing to return. Purgatory was a godsend compared to this. Liam marched onward. At first glance, Liam had mistaken her as a human like all the others, but after spending all day marching in her wake, he could see the unnatural paleness of her skin, taste the rot that emanated from her flesh, and feel the coldness of her lifeless body, even from this far away. And she wasn't alone. Buttercup, Kurt, Mastermind. There was no denying the inhumanity of them all. Reitsers, they called themselves. The last embers of mankind's fires, resurrected from the people who had died before. Were these monsters really all that remained? Liam exhaled his stress. He supposed that he wasn't much to look at himself either. At their request, he had swapped the light t-shirt he'd found on the Xinu Jong for a poncho, then donned leather gloves for his hands, and thrown a balaclava over his face. Even his eyes were shrouded below a pair of tinted goggles. The Reitzers originally wanted to give him even more layers, in spite of the sweltering heat of Los Angeles during a midsummer afternoon. Apparently, they didn't feel temperature in the same way and preferred to block out the sun. But Liam haggled his way down to the poncho in the end, though even that was bordering unbearable. He'd never understand where the hell they'd found so much heavy clothes in this part of the world. The smell was getting rough too. Liam was told that his flesh gave off a distinctive aroma that could be detected by both Reitzers and hollows alike, so there was no choice but to cover himself in dung to cover the scent. This wasn't the only time that he'd avoided predators in this manner, but this was most certainly the first where they had given him the advice. What next, mate? Liam muttered to Thirsty. Wolves telling us where to store our food. Thirsty beamed back. If only Liam could believe his life is good message right now. The group reached a bend. There was no doubt that the debris was less intense here, and the road had been cleared of any derelict blockades. We're almost at the sticks, Leah said. It's going to get risky from here. Liam raised an eyebrow. The sticks. That's what we call the boundary between the old city and pandemonium. They don't let anyone cross without screening. Do yourself a favor and pretend to be more, she paused. Dead. Liam filled in. Just not so alive. Easy for you to bloody say. Liam dragged his foot like he'd seen the hollows do. Would this work? No. That's too much. They'll see right through it. I don't know what you expect me to do. It's not like I've been gone for 12 years or anything. She sighed. Just keep quiet and follow my lead. Lower your voice if you have to say anything, and don't pull off your goggles under any circumstances. You don't have to say that twice. Good. Let's get this over with. They turned the corner, and Liam froze in place. A great barricade spanned the length of the horizon, extending upwards anywhere from 4 to 6 stories tall as far as the eye could see, its form a mix of pre-existing building, storage crates, and sheet metal, all welded together from one point to the next. The bottom layers were fortified with concrete and steel, and a 6-lane street was converted into an open field, with not enough rubble left for even a mouse to hide within. It was like staring across an infinite asphalt river. Dark figures patrolled the top of the wall, their forms hidden beneath blackened cloaks. The telltale bulge of rifles poked free from their shoulders. Then Liam noticed the checkpoint in front. A group of 4 cloaked soldiers stood within the remains of a corner shop. Each brandished automatic weapons, and Liam gulped at the sight. One lanky Reitzer stood apart from the rest, waiting behind the shop's desk as Leah approached. He looked like the incarnation of death itself, with a worn, dark cloak that dragged against the ground, and hands wrapped in cloth. His irises were shrouded red between lidless eyes, and his skin was grey and cheeks gaunt, like a person that had been carved out of stone. Were it not for the golden badge poking out from the breast of his cloak, and the assault rifle strapped to his back, Liam would have guessed he was merely a statue. Leah approached first. Hello, Karen. You're back soon, he said, unmoved. She nodded over her shoulder to Liam. Found a stray on the road. He's not all that talkative, but his res is full enough. Figured he could use a place to get himself together. So no papers. He's still too fresh, though I'm sure we can work something out. Leah opened her jacket and handed him a bundle of. Are those photographs? There were images of everything from buildings to pets to couples on a day out, all worn and faded with time. It was like Leah had pulled photos from 100 random scrapbooks, thrown them into a pile, and wrapped them with a rubber band. Karen flipped through the pictures with unblinking eyes, the muscles in his face otherwise immobile. After making it halfway through, he put the pile below his desk and nodded. Still gonna have to search you. Understood, Leah said. The 3 remaining guards began to pat them down. Liam shivered as bony fingers probed his arms and legs, but they were gone soon enough. Then the guard got to the duffel bag filled with canned food. His brow hardened as he stared Liam in the eye. What's this for? The guard asked. Before Liam could speak, Mastermind wandered between the two and tapped the guard on the knee. Ahem, good sir, he said, but that would be mine. My most illustrious of companions here offered to do me the service and carry these canned curiosities on my behalf. The guard looked down. Okay, then why do you have them? Why would I not? Do you see these here? He pointed to the characters on the cans. This script is Mandarin. So. Mastermind feigned offense. So? Does that not raise interest with you, good sir? How did these cans work their way to this part of the world? Why are they in such excellent condition? What might we learn about those who maintained such treasures when the Halloween came? I intend to resolve this puzzle by studying each of these questions in detail, and more. The guard stared dully. Oh. He set the luggage down without another word. The other two guards nodded as they finished their own searches, and Liam let out a sigh of relief. For all the madness he'd been experiencing today, at least Leah and her people had been honest in keeping him safe. So far. You're good, Karen said. Only then did he make the slightest degree of movement. He pulled a walkie-talkie from inside his cloak and held it close to his mouth. Got 5 incoming. Leah turned, and the others marched back to the street. Just be careful, Karen said. You know how pandemonium gets for first-timers. Keep safe. She nodded. You as well, Karen. The last light of day danced on the surface of the wall's metal sheets as it spread apart, revealing a gate wide enough to hold 2 lanes of traffic. The group walked into the abyss and Liam braced for impact. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. He wasn't sure what he had expected pandemonium to be. Perhaps a city made of bones, with rivers of flowing blood. Or maybe it would be a decimated ruin where shambling silhouettes drifted from one pile of debris to another. Or maybe this was all an elaborate scheme, and someone would put a bullet in his head the second he walked through the gate. Hell, Liam hadn't been fully convinced that this wasn't a delusion, and he'd wake up on his raft after swallowing too much seawater. And yet, not even the extremes of his own imagination could have possibly encapsulated the vision that lay in front. Hundreds of electronic signs jumbled the walls of the street, glowing in bright, neon lights and illuminated in every color and shade possible. Shops infested any building and crevice in sight. Tailors, jewelers, lens crafters, antique refurbishing, taxidermists, record stores, electronic repairs, clothing lines, gun shops. Many of them had television screens bolted above their doors and along the windows with advertisements running on loop. And that came before the street itself. Reitzers buzzing around every few feet in various states of decay, shopping kiosks that lined the sidewalk where there was room to set them up, salesmen screaming in their hoarse, undead voices to get anyone to pay them mind. One couldn't find a single spot to look without being the subject of 5 or more of these overstimulating displays. There was more commercialism here than Liam had ever seen before. More than he thought possible. It was like watching an endless flea market at its peak. Not even Tokyo at night could hold a candle against this madness. Leah glanced over her shoulder. You'd better stay close. Liam blinked through the shock and ignored the morgue-like taste that was quickly filling his nostrils. As his companions worked their way through the crowds, they donned a set of badges onto their breasts. The badges were made of silver and shaped into a canine skull and crossbones design. Whomever laid eyes on them bowed out of the way. A horn blared to Liam's side, and a truck rolled into view. It was militarized and painted in urban camouflage, with the trailer exposed, and filled with Reitzers dressed in the same black cloaks that Karen's people wore outside. The gate opened again and the truck soared through, then shut with a slam. Before Liam could even marvel at the sight of a working vehicle, another sailed through an adjacent street, this one covered in chrome plating and with a drawing of a cow on the side. There were so many lights. So much technology. Where the rest of the world had been a bleak, ruinous mess, this place was more robust a city than anything he'd ever seen before, in spite of all his worldly travels. Liam was breathless. Between the noise and the lights, it took everything out of him just to keep from passing out. How is this possible? As if to answer his own question, he caught sight of the upper floors. The top story's walls had been covered with solar panels, with more sticking out above, and even some wind turbines slicing through the air where there was room. Cabled wires crisscrossed the open air above the street, forming clusters before splitting away like a giant, electric spider web. Where the wires hit the sidewalk, more lanterns sprung out, showering the swarming crowd in multicolored light. The main road intersected with another, and then split apart into a pedestrian promenade. Buildings were tighter here than elsewhere, and the terrain sloped up. Roman-styled arches framed the walls of one building in view, and lanterns from the 50s lined the pathway. The vision was iconic even with the added neon lights. Past melded with present, memory collided with experience, and in a breath, Liam saw the specter of a time long since gone. He closed in on Leah. Are we in Beverly Hills? She nodded. Pandemonium was built on its ruins. We're on Rodeo Drive, specifically, though it hasn't been called that in a while. This is Asphodel. Of course it bloody is. Like everything else about the world Liam had left, these creatures were obsessed with grinding its memory into dust, rebuilding it into an imitation of what it had been before, and finally, rebranding it as though it were their own creation. What alien machination would he stumble upon next? Kurt set down the mobile refrigerator in front of one of the shops. The sign fittingly called it a butchery, though not one that Liam would ever partake in. Raw organs were splayed in the display window, covered in ice and viscera in what appeared to be an attempt to maximize its appeal. The stench of fetid meat wafted out from within, and Liam withdrew a few steps before it made him puke. The shopkeeper met up with Leah. He was a heavy one, with a giant white apron caked in blood and a set of knives conspicuously strapped to his waist. When he opened the refrigerator and examined the contents, it was done with a professional level of inquiry. The two haggled shortly after, and the shopkeeper handed her another bundle of photographs, this time with an added couple of books on top. With the exchange made, Leah distributed the photographs around to each member of her party, saving the books for herself. Anyone have any requests from the bank later? She asked. Mastermind stroked his chin in thought. I have been interested in obtaining more literature about statistical forecasting. Perhaps a condensed edition would suffice. Leah blinked. You'd have to come with me. No matter. I shall go on my own if need be. I'm sorry, Liam said as the substance of their words caught up to him, but where the hell do you people have a bank? You'd remember it as the library, Leah said. You turned a library into a bank. No. The library is the bank. Again, Liam found himself equal parts interested and confused with what he was witnessing. Was there a single aspect of undead culture that he could wrap his mind around? So let me get this straight, he said with a sigh. You use pictures and books as currency. Leah shrugged. You used pieces of paper and metal discs with dead old men on them. Liam couldn't help but laugh. Fair enough. He again looked up and down this mayhem they called a city before landing back on his hosts. So this is all that's left then. Leah's scarf curled with a grin beneath. Oh, not even close. B1, Chapter 7, Welcome to Pandemonium, 2. The group made their leave as dusk gave way to night. No sooner had they cleared the neon lights that the scene shifted dramatically. Where there had been able-bodied reachers running around the main core of Asphodel, there was a much larger demographic of crippled ones here. Some had peg legs, others with missing arms, some with eye patches or stints holding their entrails in place. And most unnervingly, many with combinations of two or more. They pressed onward, looping through clusters of shops and kiosks before rounding another bend. Leah led them through a back alley and into another side street. Sandstone walls rose to each side as they entered a monolithic courtyard. Palm trees pocketed the beige marble walkways, interrupted only by hedges that had been trimmed into neat, tight squares. There was a fountain in the middle, with water spewing from the top and falling like sheets into the bed below. The buildings themselves stretched 8 stories tall, with a flurry of balconies, landings, and archways, all rising high before hitting the red roof tiles atop, tight and clustered like they were built in the Mediterranean. Some reachers with the same skull and crossbone badges sat at nearby tables, chatting amongst themselves. A few were eating raw intestines from plates with silver forks and knives, and dabbing the blood with clean, white napkins. At least they're civilized with their savagery. They gave the group a salute. And there were more disabled reachers toiling away. Trimming the hedges, cleaning up the trash, clearing plates from the patio. Between the custodial duties and the service, they almost looked like captives. The grim reality of the city was thus exposed. The handicapped reachers were doing all the menial tasks. A one-armed man might use it to drag a cart of goods. A woman with both legs missing would be cleaning the walkways. A child with half his face melted might tinker with wiring in a fuse box. And that was if they were doing anything at all. Many of the amputees they had passed were huddled together in dirty clothes around fires, whispering while Leah and her group marched by, but otherwise keeping their distance. Of all the paradigms Liam had witnessed, of all the social contradictions that he had faced, this one had to be the most obscene. Basic human decency was premised on the idea that the strong cared for the weak, but here, it was the opposite. The weak seemed only to exist in order to service the strong. Was this what mankind had been reduced to? The group entered the antechamber, and the moment became truly surreal. Afghan rugs stretched across spotless white marble floors, starting from a mahogany desk before splitting into neighboring halls. The walls glittered with gilded artwork where there weren't alabaster statues or exotic potted plants, and chandeliers spilled from the ceiling, twinkling crystalline light like silver encased in diamonds. There wasn't a speck of dust in sight. Everything seemed to radiate in a veneer of immaculacy. Welcome to the lodge, Leah said. My home. Just when Liam thought he'd reached his limit, he had been surpassed. This is all yours. Technically just the top 2 floors. Leah, this looks like a 5-star hotel built for celebrities who complain that the nuts in their salad are the wrong brand of vegan. Buttercup laughed. That's because it was. Nothing but the best for us hunters. Liam should have let it pass, but he couldn't help himself. Isn't this a bit much? It's only 50 rooms for us, give or take, Leah said, as if to downplay her own excess. Besides, I let the workers use the empty ones for free, in exchange for helping to maintain the property when we're not around. If they're doing work in exchange for something, then that is by definition not free. By the looks of how they're keeping this place, seems like you've got the better end of the stick on this one, yet. She kept walking. Nobody's perfect. The others split apart to find their own manners in this sprawling estate, leaving Liam and Leah alone. She led him through the halls and upstairs in silence, occasionally stopping to give orders to the workers that were always just at the edge of sight. Whether their desire to help was genuine or not, none could say. A nation built by corpses can only ever produce more corpses, Leah had said, and now Liam could see why. All of the industry that he had witnessed, all of the progress they had restored, and this was the cost. There was no concept of hardship for a race that could never age and die, nor could they empathize with the pain of others when they could never experience it for themselves. Their civilization was a reflection of those within, and they had no families, no future, and knew no purpose other than the elevation of the self. If that meant that the strong must leverage their power against the decrepit in order to advance, then the sacrifice of the weak was but a small price to pay. Pandemonium. The capital of the Reitsers. It was the center of their nation, the mecca of their culture. Could they have come up with a more fitting name? The pair stopped near the top floor and turned a corner. There was only one door in sight, and it was open. Without saying a word, Leah pushed him gently behind her and drew her pistol. Liam took the cue and hung a few feet back as they marched through. Liam was yet again blown away by the sheer size and scope of her suite. It had to have covered thousands of square feet, with more than a dozen rooms linked together. Bedrooms, bathrooms, kitchens, entertainment centers, balconies. All pristine white where there wasn't famous artwork. Was this a hotel room, or the heart of a palace? But then their sight fell to a corner. A female Reitzer leaned against one of the doors, her back to theirs. She only had a single arm and leg, with the elbow closing into bone, and leg with a prosthetic bolted straight into her knee. While her clothes looked as presentable as everyone else around here, her skin was shriveled and peeling wherever it was exposed. As they drew near, the sound of metal scraping inside the lock became apparent. Leah rushed over, yanked the trespasser free, and pushed her against the wall, the barrel of her suppressed pistol digging into her scalp. Looking for something, Chantal? Leah roared. Her red eyes bulged. Oh, God, Leah. It's not how it looks. Leah twisted her arm over her shoulder and threw. Chantal's lithe frame rocketed onto the floor. Bone cracked through flesh as her back struck the carpet. Easy. Liam shouted. Leah glared. Stay out of this. Please. Chantal gasped. ISS swear, IJ just need SS something to eat. The distro meat not good enough for you? Thought you'd take the easy way and steal something from me instead? Maybe get a night at Elysium that you've never earned. She pressed her knee against her chest. For pity's sake, Liam said. Look at her. She's not some bandit on the road. But Leah just aimed the pistol between her eyes. Why shouldn't I just purge you right here? Why do you deserve the chance to survive? Red tears ran down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Leah. I promise, I was gonna return what I took. IJJ just can't go back. My res. Once IG go drag IWW1TC come back. Not this TT time. ICC can feel it. Leah let Chantal go, and the poor woman cried, with streams of those red-colored tears sprouting free. There was something different about her, in a way that Liam hadn't seen before. Unlike the vibrant hue that all the other Reitzers had, her eyes were dull and pale, as if the light was about to blink out. Leah holstered her pistol and reached into her jacket. A couple of photographs came tumbling out. Here, Leah said, scattering them about. Go get yourself something nice. Chantal licked her blackened lips. Do you mean it? She held up one of the photographs. It was a sunset overlooking the San Francisco Bay. I took this one myself at Seaside a few months back, last time I was there. You can have it. Chantal clutched the picture to her chest as though it was made of gold. Thank you. Leah leaned in, her eyes like two smoldering orchids. But so help me, Chantal. If I ever catch you pulling something like this, and I mean ever, I will drain you myself, nice and slow, so you can spend all the time in the world thinking about how much you fucked up, until there won't be any thinking left. She nudged her shoulder. Go on and fuck off. Chantal floundered onto her chest and scurried away, made more heartbreaking by the lack of her arm, unworkable leg, and now crooked back. Liam stared Leah in the eye the moment Chantal left. There was nothing more to say. No moral justification to be levied. His tolerance could only go so far. Don't judge me, Leah scoffed. If I didn't send a message, she'd start thinking that I can get rolled. Don't underestimate what we're capable of when we get desperate enough. But Liam only crossed his arms. You didn't have to hit her. It's for her own good. Is it? Leah said nothing. For a time, the two stood in the hall of this ostentatious room, neither making a move to do much else. This wasn't the sort of impasse that Liam intended to let slip, end of the world or not. She sighed. You probably think we call ourselves Reitzers out of some derivation of the word resurrection, hey. I don't see what that has to do with anything, Liam said, still firm. What separates us from you isn't how our bodies were reborn, but how our minds are sustained. Every sentient creature has an internal well of thought. Their own reservoir. Any memory gain trickles its way down to there. The older you get, the larger your res becomes. But for us, it's the opposite. The hollowing has rendered our reservoirs into a constant state of regression. If we don't fight hard to restore them, we revert back into the hollows we came from. That's the vulnerability of our kind. Without mental sustenance to keep our reservoirs stable, they erode, and the memories leak out. And so you can see why we became Reitzers. The strength of our souls is dependent on the design of our individual reservoirs, and if we ever allow them to break, we die again, but this time more slowly and with full awareness of its decay. That's what was happening to Chantal, and I can only hope that by gifting a small part of my story, she'll be able to sustain hers. She took a step forth. This is why you're here, Liam Fenix. The key to ending this fate is hidden in your uncorrupted blood. Only through you can the hollowing be reversed. Liam stayed silent. This was all so very much. He looked to the empty space where Chantal had been and contemplated all that he'd been told. Could there really be a worse fate than that? B1, Chapter 8, Mother's Grace, 1. You might wonder why I call myself God-fearing. I fear God's wrath not out of a lack of faith, but because it is He who has punished us for our own hubris. Only through repentance to Him can we be saved. Father Elijah Campbell. Larkspur, Colorado, 20 days after. Time again to take off the mask. Leah had let Liam Fenix lie down in one of the living rooms of her suite while she showered. That would give the human a couple hours to rest and recover while she purified herself. Preparations would need to be made, and the next couple meetings would make all the difference, especially her first with Mother. This night was far from over. Leah first took off her clothes. The sheepskin jacket had been torn, and her jeans were stained and dusty. She folded them next to her boots and socks. Her t-shirt with supplies came next, then her bra, and then her underwear. None were much improved, but there was no way out of it. She'd have to get them all cleaned. Only after her clothing was cleared did she remove her scarf. She did not trust anyone else to wash it. That was her job alone, and she'd made a habit of running it through the sink while undergoing every other step. Now disrobed, Leah rubbed fingers across her naked torso. The wound to her shoulder was blackened and closing, but she breathed a sigh of relief. Necrosis hadn't sullied the area enough to warrant another skin job, and it would be healed within the day. She felt around her limbs. Cracks and wrinkles were inevitable after this much time in the field, though Leah had done well to keep her body from being too far strained. The real concern was the pallid look that her skin had started to take. The summer sun was rough. Leah stepped into the shower. Water flowed over her frame, clearing out any grime that had built, or ointments she had applied. This part of the process was by far the easiest now that Pandemonium had a working plumbing system. Even with the added step of applying shampoo with built-in conditioner for her dried scalp, she spent mere minutes doing what had once taken hours. When her shower was complete, Leah brought out the container of isopropyl and rag she kept below the sink. The hollowing was the antithesis of life. Bacteria couldn't form inside her organs where it had spread its corruption. But the same couldn't be said for her skin, which still decomposed from the outside and when not maintained. Before she could even think of applying protections, she had to disinfect her flesh first. And so that was what Leah did. Slowly, carefully, she wiped every inch of her form. Every orifice, every fissure, leaving nowhere untouched. Leah was methodical in her movement, as even the tiniest gap could cause blemishes to form and spread. The aroma of alcohol filled the bathroom as the process wore on. With her body sufficiently cleansed, Leah moved on to the preservation part of her routine. The brand of anti-aging serum she used had been designed by a local in downtown Asphodel, and she had found it to have no old-world rival in efficacy. Moisturizer came after the serum set in. Retaining water was important, especially with the dryness of this time of year. She went through a full quart before satisfied. Sunscreen came last, and was applied to any part of her body that might end up exposed. Even with the heaviest of clothing, there was nothing that truly helped stave off the deleterious effects of the sun on her skin like an added coat of UV protection, even if sunlight lessened the hunger. Leah left the shower, washed the excess alcohol and oils down the drain, and went to the sink. Her scarf was sufficiently soaked, so she removed it to dry. She then returned to the mirror, ignored her mark, and only focused on her eyes, applying mascara to draw attention away from all else, along with adding a cosmetic cream to give her cheeks an even color. Leah went to the clothing room of her suite and dug through the many options she'd cultivated. Underwear and bras were only valuable in the utility they provided, and most of her jeans were built the same. She dug through shirts and found the one with the most pockets. Old-world soldiers often wore flak jackets to keep bullets from piercing anything vital, and so Leah had designed her t-shirts for the same purpose. Just about all of them could hold more than a dozen mags, insulated canteens with blood, some flesh-based gum from the larder, a flashlight, binoculars, her black steel combat knife, and a Velcro holster for her 1911, modified to accommodate the added suppressor. Each clung to her chest, always within arm's reach, and none too heavy. Unlike the living with their flak jackets, there was no value in protecting the soft organs beneath. Most of them did nothing anymore. Additional gear could also work its way onto her sheepskin jacket, should the need arise. Leah swapped the damaged pair for a replacement, this one brown and buttoned, while most were black and zippered. Where the flesh of the undead was malleable and in constant decay, Reetzers had a habit of expressing themselves mostly through their clothing, and this was where Leah had drifted herself. Sheepskin jackets were comfortable against her skin, kept the elements at bay, and made her feel unique. With a final pull of black leather gloves inlaid with cotton over her wrists, her outfit was complete. Well, almost complete. Leah returned to the rack and air-dried her burgundy scarf. Of all the articles that she had collected, none bore more significance than her scarf. It was more meaningful than any pile of books, and brought about a memory more profound than any box of pics could ever provide. Were Leah to ever lose this cornerstone of her identity, there would be little to keep the hollowing at bay. She gripped the fabric in her hand, knowing all that it represented. Time again to put on the mask. Tartarus was the district that lay between Asphodel and Elysium. Where Asphodel was the center of commerce and Elysium the nexus of power, Tartarus sat as the Wild West in between. Straight too far from the main routes of traffic, and it wasn't uncommon to get mugged by a gang of desperate dregs, attacked by some opportunistic worker, or worse, even face someone who had recently rehollowed. Hunters could only cover so much territory, and most inhabitants of Tartarus were too poor to put out an enticing contract. That left them at the mercy of localized union cartels who offered protection and community maintenance in exchange for a cut of the picks that trickled in. Most of the bosses turned a blind eye to the poverty, and the constant threat of hollowing kept the rest in line. After all, who wouldn't prefer hard labor and the opportunity to advance, when the alternative meant having no chance at all? So it only made sense that Mother had set up her operation here, right in the heart of the district. Mother's Grace had once been a hospital in the old world. In many ways, it still was, even if only some of the equipment was still operational. Leah approached with Liam Fenix and Kurt in tow. The others had their own errands to conduct, and nobody would harass the pair with Kurt by their side. Twin columns rose above a 6-lane road in front. White stone encased glass in a set of 10-story buildings. The central tower connected the two above an open tunnel, its boundary like a giant, glass monolith. The names of the old world humans who had built this acropolis had all been scrubbed. It only stood apart from the rest of the city with the great banners that fell from the roof, white fabric with a red cross in the middle. Where all else inside had the fractures and shattered glass that was present for the rest of Tartarus, Mother's grace resonated an aura of security. Like everything else in Pandemonium, the tranquility was only skin deep. Guards dressed in scrubs patrolled the perimeter brandishing AR-15s with soft point rounds, lest thieves attempt to pilfer Mother for all she had built. Traffic was monitored at every entrance through security checkpoints. And for all the talk of anyone being allowed inside its walls, no shortage of patients were turned away by the day. There were only so many qualified physicians and resources to go around. The group cleared the checkpoint and went through the halls. Moans of the injured were a constant torrent, and the smell of death was heavier here than anywhere else. No surprise, given the circumstances. Broken prosthetics needed to be replaced, severed limbs had to be sewn back onto their owners, skin jobs were necessary as the luxury service of grafting foreign skin, and dead organs had to be removed where applicable. In addition to servicing the medical needs of the undead, Mother had also broken one of the wards into a post-hollow rehabilitation center for those who had slipped too far, and the other into a hospice for displaced workers in need of a place of comfort. Leah knew these halls well, and quickly navigated her way to the trauma center. If Mother was in town, she would be there, though she had a habit of disappearing for weeks, if not months at a time. Not today. Mother was in the heart of the mess, dressed in a lab coat that was caked in undead ichor. Her blonde hair was streaked in white, and her violet eyes had a calmness that bordered indifference as she snapped the bones of a patient's twisted arm back into place. She had hollowed during her middle age, and did little to protect her skin more than necessary. Her face had thus shriveled into what appeared to be an older, frielier woman, though that was mere deception. Of everyone else in Pandemonium, there was none more intelligent. Nor manipulative. Mother, Leah hailed. The two made eye contact, and Mother continued her operation. You don't look like you need care, Leah. I don't, Leah said, but this is important. Isn't it always important with you? This isn't about me. She nodded to Liam Fenix. My friend here. You need to see him. Mother kept her eyes on her work. There are plenty of attendees around who can see to his needs. Leah sighed. I don't think you get it, Mother. You need to see him. Only then was her impassivity pierced. Mother looked at the ensemble that Liam Fenix was buried under and knew the truth. She could see the solution that their world craved. B1, Chapter 8, Mother's Grace, 2. Mother quietly found a replacement and ushered the group down the hall, away from the trauma center and into her private office. Liam Fenix yanked off his balaclava and tinted goggles the moment they were clear. Jesus Christ, he said. You have no idea how stifling that is. Leah kept her eyes on Mother. Well. Mother switched her dirty gloves for a fresh pair. Well, what? She scoffed. How fucking long have you been asking for this? How long have you wanted to examine a living human again? Now one's right in front of you, and you're pulling this shit. Hold out your arm, Mother said to Liam Fenix as she pulled a syringe free. Back to ignoring me, hey? He complied, and she drew some of his red, living blood. Leah's tongue burned at the sight of fresh blood flowing free. The hunger was a real bitch. So where were you hiding? Mother asked, pretending she didn't feel the same. Liam Fenix explained his story again, about being marooned on an island for the entirety of the Hallowing, and about how much effort he'd put in to find his way back. As much as Leah could find humans soft, there was no denying that Liam Fenix had pulled off nothing short of a miracle traversing the sea by himself. Not even she could have executed that one. Mother listened with her usual bare neutrality, only interjecting to ask questions about his diet and medical history. She drew several vials of blood, each for a different test. Is it true then? Liam Fenix asked. Can you use me to end this mess? Our understanding of HBRS 15.21 has evolved, Mother said, referring to the Hallowing by its scientific name. With the proper resources, anything is possible. It will take time and need to happen under the right conditions, however. The human frowned. I still can't believe how much has changed. Not just the city, but even this place. To think that I used to come by this very hospital twice a month for shots before heading abroad. You lived around here before? Mother asked. He nodded. Lakewood, to be specific. God, it was always a nightmare coming all the way up here, but it couldn't be helped. Between my agent and my wife, I couldn't have anything but the best of care. Leah grimaced beneath her scarf. Didn't know you were married. She'd always wondered what such a union would feel like. Still am. He smiled meekly and looked from one to the other. You never know, right? Mother and Leah let the moment sit uncontested. This wasn't the first time that either had seen a human in denial, though Leah considered that this would probably be the last. I suppose that is true, Mother deflected. As for yourself, Mr. Fenix, I'll have more information for you once the tests are complete. For now, I'd ask that you wait in one of my isolation units. My security will be able to better watch you there than here. Kurt can guard him just fine, Leah said. Only then did Mother acknowledge her existence again. Perhaps we should talk about this further in private. I won't be a bird, Liam Fenix started. It's fine, Leah snapped. You should clear the floor, Liam Fenix. All that blood will start drawing attention. She stared Mother down. And the two of us should catch up. If you insist, he squeaked. Kurt returned when prompted, and Liam Fenix made his escape, leaving just Mother and Leah alone. It had been years since they were by themselves like this. How have you been? Mother asked. Still surviving, Leah said. Is that what you call what you are doing? That's what everyone calls what we're doing. She shrugged. I see. I guess you haven't changed then. Of course she'd be difficult. What the fuck do you want from me, Mother? An apology for what we did? I'm here now, aren't I? Mother raised an eyebrow. Why are you here? I don't have pics to offer. Leah met her head on. I didn't come all this way to dance in circles. It's just you and me, so no more bullshit. Is there any hope to cure the hollowing or not? Mother looked out the window, her eyes tracing the distant floodlights of Elysium. There's always been hope. We've just been too arrogant to take it. She turned back. But you didn't answer my question. Why are you here, Leah? Why, indeed. This wasn't how Leah normally conducted herself. She had learned long ago that the only way to survive was to become more hard and more vicious than everyone else. In a world where the dead butchered the dead just to keep their minds intact, it had made sense for her to fight the everlasting inferno with a fury of her own. But that had all been changing lately. Leah could feel it in the air. She could taste it every time she finished a hunt. That intangible, ephemeral sensation that she had never known. Those experiences that she could never gain while undead, and had only ever viewed through the looking glass of the past. Was that what drove her onward? That desire to be what she had only seen? I want to put my feet in the water and feel the cold, Leah admitted. I want to stare over a cliff and know true fear. I want to make love with another. I don't want to be the monster anymore, or to feel so fucking hungry all the time. I want to look a child in the eye and know that my story will continue, even with me gone. Tears began to well, and her voice cracked. Fuck, I want to live. Leah dabbed the reddish fluid from her eyes and pulled her scarf further up. She hadn't expected to break down like this, and didn't know how she'd felt until the words came tumbling out, but now they were here, and she couldn't shy away from them anymore. If there was anything in this world that Leah craved, it was the life that she'd been damned to never have. Mother stared in silence, her own face hidden behind the cowl of impartiality. It's more than possible, she said at last. Leah gaped. Seriously? This isn't like the old days, Leah. We have more resources than we know what to do with, and a better understanding of HBRS 15.21 than even its creators. Provided I have the right ingredients and instrumentation, I could easily reverse its mechanism. Leah stared deep. How would you do it? She had to hear the process out loud. She had to know that she wasn't being bullshitted. Mother stroked her chin in contemplation. I could attempt healthy enzyme infusion in infected ganglia, or perhaps use DNA realignment with Liam Fenix's hemoglobin as the base. Worst comes to worst, and I'll develop a counter serum that only targets HBRS pseudo-cells. She met Leah in the eye. There are no shortages of avenues that can be taken. Some could be properly tested within hours. Weeks, at the absolute latest. Leah had never been strong in the sciences, but Mother was being uncharacteristically confident. When was the last time she made a guarantee like this? Don't screw around with me, Mother. If this is false hope, and you can't deliver. Mother smiled. Make no mistake, Leah. This is the only hope we have. Without it, there will be no future. A world without hollowing. Something that researchers like to fantasize about, but that none truly believed would come. It was their ultimate daydream, their Jesus come again moment. To hear that it might be possible from the one person capable of fulfilling the task. Leah didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What about Hades? Mother suddenly asked. Leah grimaced. Let me deal with him. You know where he'll stand. I don't have a choice, do I? I got spotted nabbing the human. You don't know that he knows. I do know what will happen to me if he does. Mother went destitute, all her energy deflated. Just don't forget what we talked about. Leah turned to leave. I won't. As she was about to make her leave, Mother called for her one last time. It was good to see you again, Leah. Take care of yourself. Leah wanted to say the same, but she couldn't. Not after what Mother had done. B1, Chapter 9, HBRS 15.21. HBRS 15.21 has no natural relative. It is neither a prokaryote nor eukaryote. It is an entirely synthetic life form, and therefore has no organic counter. We were the ones to create it, and only we can be the ones to stop it. Dr. Ava Sherman. Geneva, Switzerland, 10 days after. Had Liam survived all this time for this? The impact was only starting to weigh in. He had spent his day in perpetual whiplash, jumping from one shock to the next like a skier bouncing off moguls, and now was perhaps the first chance he'd had to truly contemplate the severity of his circumstance. Since Mother had left to conduct her tests, and Kurt was outside on guard duty, Liam had been left alone, with nothing but his idle mind for company. The world had died in his absence. Liam had been gone for 12 years, and in the time of his isolation, all of his fears had been vindicated. Nobody ever came for you because there were no people left, he reflected. All the lies he'd told himself late at night, all the optimism he had forced into his mind, and it had just been the delusions of a marooned madman. Everyone was dead. His friends. His studio. His agent. His consultants. His audience. His family. No, he couldn't consider that. If even Lilith and Nellie were gone too. If they had become those things. What would be the point of life then? Why should he continue this cruel game? Mother entered the room. For a moment and in the shade of the dark, she almost looked human, dressed in a clean, white lab coat, and with a stethoscope hanging around her neck. But then she flipped the lights of the room on, and the pallid skin became apparent, along with the blackish lips of the dead, and inhuman, purple eyes. She walked closer, and Liam spotted a layer of dust on the stethoscope. The damned thing must have not been used in years. Good news, Mr. Fenix, she said. In spite of your condition, you've managed to stay in relatively good health. Though your iron is low, it isn't deficient, and while you're underweight, with the proper diet, you will be back to normal in less than a week. That concussion appears to have lessened as well, but you'll still need to be careful. She started to measure his heart rate and blood pressure while continuing to talk about his vitals, and Liam drifted off. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to listen to any more of this drivel. He wanted to be back home, in his own bed, with his daughter in his arms and wife by his side. He wanted to have been justified for struggling so hard and for so long. He just wanted this nightmare to end. Are you listening to a word I'm saying? Mother asked. Liam snapped back. Sorry, you lost me there for a second. I'm just a little tired. I know this is difficult, but you have to pay attention. Infection is the highest risk to your safety right now. You have to understand what you're dealing with if you want to survive. There that word was again. Survive. How much longer would he be subjected to its oppression? He needed to keep his mind distracted. You seem to be the most knowledgeable around here, so tell me then. What am I dealing with? How does a pandemic like this occur? Have you ever heard of Dynamic? It rings a bell. They were a large pharmaceutical company that researched evolutionary biology and life-extending technology. One of their concepts involved applying the mathematical model of cellular automaton to replicate microorganic behavior in humans post-mortem, using a synthetic biological agent that mirrored the environment of neighboring cells while simultaneously developing its own neural network. The process became known as the Human Biophysical Recovery System, or HBRS for short. The agent responsible for the outbreak was the 15th generation developed, and 21st iteration of that generation, or HBRS 15.21. Liam blinked back the avalanche of scary-sounding words. Could you do me a favor and explain this for the layman? I never went to college. Mother stared into nothing, as a teacher might before giving a lesson. Consider the nature of a living cell for a moment. They are ordered chemical systems designed to survive in otherwise chaotic environments. The more effectively that cells can remain ordered, the longer they are considered alive. All living cells follow this pattern, from the smallest bacterium to the largest mammal. Humans are no exception. But while this basic premise allows for life to occur, it also carries a fundamental flaw, the chaotic nature of the universe itself. Regardless of how much order an organism can develop, entropy will continue to rise, and the end result will always be the same. Chaos overwhelms order and the cell dies. You could say that chaos is the force of death. The shadows passed over her wrinkled face. Which was why Dynamic created the concept of the pseudo-cell. Where living cells are ordered systems designed to survive in chaotic environments, pseudo-cells are chaotic systems designed to operate only in ordered environments. The tiniest of chemical variations surrounding a pseudo-cell causes massive structural alterations, if not outright destruction. Their design must therefore be fine-tuned and their ecosystem chosen with great care, lest they collapse under their own chaotic weight. HBRS 15.21 accomplishes this goal. Using cellular automaton, Ian imprinted this pseudo-cell type with a series of biochemical triggers such that it would radically adapt to whichever organ it resides within. In any context other than the human body, HBRS 15.21 falls apart, but so long as there are adjacent human cells, it can absorb, modify, and replicate, folding its semi-porous membranes like facings on a Rubik's cube. With each chemical change, another manipulation occurs, and the overall structure becomes more stable, until it has mimicked the behavior of nearby host cells. Liam squinted. I think you've lost me again. What do Rubik's cubes have to do with this? She paused. Think of HBRS pseudocells as if they're stem cells. They don't know anything other than what their neighbors are doing, and they change their behavior based on that. One might mirror a lung cell, another might copy a muscle cell, and another might bridge the neurological gap in between. The key difference between HBRS and normal human biophysics is that it continues to animate the body even after the host cells have long since died out. She smiled. One might fairly call this phenomenon undeath. We are neither living nor dead, but in a suspended state in between. He sighed. You keep acting like you are no longer alive, but you still seem intelligent enough. Why don't you just return to your old homes and live the way you used to? Mother frowned. I'm afraid it doesn't work that way. During the process of resurrection, some parts of the brain are damaged beyond repair. She stared at a small bite mark on her wrist. It's strange, I'll admit. Procedural, semantic, and declarative memories can all come back, but there isn't a single reader around whose personal or episodic memories have recovered. I can tell you how a heart works without being prompted. I can get in a car and turn it on. I can look at a tree and know the word. But if you asked me for my own name? Nothing. The only way for me to know is for someone else to tell me. And the same goes for everything else about my family, my friends, and myself. HBRS 15.21 didn't just rob me of my life. It wiped the slate clean. Liam frowned. My wife and my daughter are still out there. I just know it. Are you really telling me that they'd never be able to recognize me in this state? Mother met his gaze in silence for a moment, her eyes hard. Liam's heart sank as he contemplated the question further. Of all the creatures that he'd seen wandering the city, would he even be able to recognize them? No, they would never recognize you, she said at last. At least in their current state. Though I must now be frank, Mr. Fenix. Roughly 1/3 of humanity's total population died during the first 6 months of the outbreak. Mind you, they weren't infected. They were killed outright, whether by military force or the ensuing civil unrest. Of those that remained, only a fraction rebuilt enough intelligence to become Reitsers. Most remain trapped as hollowed-classed infected indefinitely. That is why a cure is necessary. Until such a time where we no longer are subjected to HBRS 15.21, it will forever be impossible to regain our old lives. The only chance you'd ever have to see them is to work with me, and even then, there are no guarantees. None of what Mother said surprised Liam, but hearing the words out loud was at the cusp of what he could bear. His throat tightened and the tears came to his eyes, but he blinked them back before they could spring free and fall. I understand, he said, burying the pain. It's best not to get too ambitious right now. I'm sure there will be plenty of time for all that, yet. Though he wasn't sure if he believed it. Mother set aside the stethoscope, pulled up a chair, and sat next to him. I'm sorry, Liam. This must all be extraordinarily difficult for you to process. Take as much time as you need. She put a hand on his leg. It wasn't what Mother was saying, nor was it the tone of her raspy voice, nor was it the fact that no one had said so much as I'm sorry until this very moment. It was the hand on his leg. Liam hadn't had human contact for longer than he could remember. He supposed he still hadn't. An Ian in isolation later, and the closest he could get was the cold touch of a lifeless corpse on his knee. Liam cried. Why must it all be so impossible? Did he truly deserve a fate such as this? He had spent so much time trying to reclaim all that he'd lost, he had used every skill in his arsenal to stand back up, and he had even flourished to such a degree as to not only survive, but to escape. And his reward for doing the impossible? Not the mythical homecoming that he had foreseen, but another hopelessly steep wall to scale. The tears ran down his cheeks and snot spilled from his nose, and still he did not relent. Liam did not deserve to endure such hardship. It wasn't his job to save the world. He was a television survivalist, and not an ounce more. Why must the odds always be so far stacked against him? And so Liam cried and cried until he thought he had no tears left, and then cried a little more. Mother sat patiently, her cold, dead hand trying to massage the life back into his. The moment was as comical as it was depressing. The dead was all he had to give him life. He wiped the wetness from his cheeks and blew his nose one last time. Thank you, he said. I didn't realize just how much I'd needed that. Mother nodded. You've been through a lot, and there will be plenty more to come. Yes, I know. She frowned. I must warn you now that you do not. Here we go again. What else could there be? Right now, Leah is meeting with Hades, the leader of the city. He does not see things in the same way as me. He will do everything in his power to have you killed. Of course. Another trial to pass, another spin of the wheel. Would it ever end? Can't be worse than what I've dealt with until now, yet. Mother suddenly studied him. Why did you come back here, Liam? What drove you to put yourself at such risk? My family, he admitted. I can't live without them. Good. Our interests are entwined then, as their lives are now dependent on yours. Only through your continued existence can you hope to see them again, in whatever form we find them. He shook his head. You wouldn't understand, but that isn't good enough. I promised that I'd see them again. It has to be them, or there's no point. I do understand, more than you could know. She stood. I'm going to tell you a story now, and one that I've shared with no one else. Liam watched on as she paced the room. There was once a time where I wasn't Mother. I'd been called a different name, and by different people. I only adopted that title as a primitive means of forging my own identity, free from their tyranny. The word had no meaning, save for that which I'd proscribed for myself. I didn't know what a mother was. Until Evelyn. The infection was burning the world down and civilization was in its final death throes, but it was there that I encountered a young girl, barely in her teenage years. Evelyn was at the center of the storm. Isolated, orphaned, and with no hope of her own, just waiting for the end to come. She tapped her hand against the window. I could have left her to her fate, or consumed her for sustenance, but something stirred inside me the moment we made eye contact. Something I'd never felt before. It was my human self, Liam. It didn't matter that I was an infertile cannibal trapped in this undead coil, nor did it matter that we had no relationship. Evelyn was a child in need of a mother, and I was a mother without a child. So I took Evelyn under my wing, and became Mother, in the true sense of the term. It all made so much sense after that. She trailed off. Her tone was different. Mother had been every bit of a professional until this moment, but there was a certain longing that bled through. The kind that Liam felt himself when he lay at night and thought of Lilith. What happened to her? Liam asked. Mother stared back. What do you think? His cheeks reddened. I'm sorry. This is what makes what we're doing so important, Liam. Let's not lose sight of that fact. The past might be gone, but the future can still be saved. Liam rubbed the sweat from his brow. What are you asking me to do? Only as you've done until now. Survive. No matter the cost. However it must be done. Your life is more important than everyone else in this building. Morality is irrelevant to that end. What about Leah? Mother looked out the window. There were bright floodlights on the horizon. Leah will have her own decision to make. You have to assume that she's an unreliable partner. But she saved my life, Liam pointed out. Mother shuttered the window. Leah is complicated. She is the oldest one of us still around, and has seen no shortage of the living rise and fall. I trust that she will do whatever she believes is right. I do not trust that it will be enough. Pandemonium is exactly as it sounds, a chaotic, myopic asylum for a misbegotten race. Whatever belief you may have about your own safety with her, that is far from guaranteed. She has her own interests to consider. Why can't anyone just give me a break? Seems like this is the last place for me to be then. You are correct. Pandemonium is the absolute worst place you could have been brought. She strolled across the room. Kurt doesn't know it, but I had a reason for picking this wing. There's a fire escape that can take you to the ground floor, free from any checkpoints. I suggest that you use it, should the need arise. Liam blinked. And go where? Mother grinned. You came back here with a purpose, did you not? Perhaps you should use that purpose to guide your path forward. Liam stared wide-eyed. This one really liked to take him for a ride. 1 minute, Mother was saying that his life was the most important thing in the world, and the next, she wanted him to run off on his own to get killed. Make up your bloody mind, already. Mother went for the door. I have to go now. Remember what we've talked about. She stepped outside before he could get another word from her. For a while, Liam simply sat and watched the back door exit. To step beyond its threshold alone was to sacrifice the security he'd been given, and trying to survive in this alien environment unassisted was a foolhardy endeavor, bordering suicide. Could he have really come all this way just to die doing something so misguided? And yet, the more he watched the door, the more resolved he became. Mother had been right on one point. His instincts had gotten him to this point, and they screamed that Lilith and Nellie were still alive, regardless of what the others might think. So long as Liam could cling to that dream, nothing could stop him. He could climb this impassable cliff yet again. Liam wrapped the balaclava back around his head and went for the exit, his luggage filled with food in hand. Promise me, Nellie had said. It didn't matter the odds, or the dangers, or the obstacles that would be in his way. This was one promise he'd never leave unfulfilled. B1, Chapter 10, Another Deal, 1. We stand here at the hour of judgment and beg for God's forgiveness. Forgive us, dear Lord. Not for what we have done, but for what we must now do. We cannot allow the devil to corrupt our souls. Father Elijah Campbell. Larkspur, Colorado. 20 days after. This wasn't going to get any easier. Elysium was a celebration of pure debauchery that never slept, never rested, and never slowed. Even this late at night, there was a line that stretched around the block, as most workers would spend weeks at a time saving picks just to grace its halls for a few short hours. Leah found her place among their ranks, waiting patiently for her own time to come. It wasn't long before one of the guards spotted her in the crowd and came her way. He pointed. You're up. Those in front began to hiss, and Leah shrugged. Seems a lot of others got here first. I don't mind waiting. The boss won't. Shit. That was never a good sign. Wordless, Leah stepped by the others and entered Elysium. The graffiti-laced walls were all too familiar, and the mix of EDM, metal, and rock vibrating throughout the lobby brought back memories of days best forgotten. How many wonderful moments had she sacrificed to gain some pleasure here? The moans of patrons and the throes of lust built as Leah passed one of the chambers. There was no rival greater than lust that could bring Reitzers closer to capturing the carnal indulgence that living humans had once known. Leah would be a liar if she claimed that she wasn't tempted into abandoning all else to enter one of those rooms. The lure was that strong. But she couldn't. Leah knew better than anyone how deleterious the sins of Elysium were to the strength of a res, and there were much more important matters at hand than to sate hedonistic wants. Leah went through the halls in silence, her only focus the meeting she had no choice in attending. Hades sat atop his throne. His shriveled visage narrowed on Leah the moment she entered, and he waved off a troop of workers that were attending his every need. He grinned wide, which would have been more intimidating had his outfit not betrayed the seriousness of his position. A white and red felt cloak was thrown over his back, a paper crown had been placed on his hairless scalp, and he carried a plastic scepter in one hand. He looked ridiculous, but that was where the power and advantage came from. Beneath the flamboyant, desiccated Reitzer was the warlord who had shattered every monument of the old world and rebuilt it into his own image. Everything, from pandemonium, to the social structure they lived under, to the power and food supply, to the very currency they had developed, all had their roots back to him. There was no one more dangerous. Hades steepled his gloved hands. Well, if it isn't pandemonium's best, Leah. Interesting get up, Your Excellence, Leah hailed with just the right emphasis to border between acknowledgement and arrogance. Hades valued boldness above all else. He beamed. Like it, huh? Some hunters found it inside one of those restaurant franchises out east. I'm king of the burgers, or something. You're king of something, that's for sure. What do you think the lettuce should be? Leah paused to consider the riddle. If there was anyone who enjoyed baiting people into frivolous debate more than Mastermind, it was Hades. Problem was that failing his tests usually meant losing a limb. Afraid you've lost me on this one, she said. Hades began to pace around the pit. You know what I like most about this outfit? It got me thinking about burgers. You ever have one, Leah? Can't say that I have. I guess none of us can, what with our current predicament and all. He swung the plastic scepter over his shoulder. That's why I'm thinking it's time to change that. I'm gonna throw together a big OLE barbecue. He leaned back and winked. Sense the grill, of course. Everyone will be talking about it, from the biggest boss to the dreariest dreg, and they're all gonna be saying the same thing, about how Lord Hades whipped up the best fucking burger this side of the Mississippi. A perfectly juicy, delicious, post-apocalyptic snack, the likes of which no one has ever seen. And you can bet your sweet ass I'm gonna use nothing but the best ingredients. He went back to his patrol. You see, most of it, I've got figured out already. The bread? Easy. Some thick cowskin wrapped around fat. Perfect consistency, and it'll be nice and greasy like the real deal. I'll season the bun with some ground bone too. Everyone loves bone. You know what they say, calcium's good for the soul. Then there's ketchup. Another layup. I'll just use blood. Oh negative, maybe. Think we still have some in storage. Cheese though? That was a little tricky, but I put my noggin to the task and I figured it out. Leah crossed her arms. You going anywhere with this? She had a feeling she'd go hollow well before he made his point. But Hades kept walking as if he hadn't heard. Pus. Good choice, right? Haven't had a glaze of pus with a meal in quite a while, and if there ever was a substitute for cheese, it'd be pus. Hard to get in large quantities, but that's where hunters like yourself come in handy. Before Leah could speak, Hades waved her off. Now the tomatoes, that was a fun one. How the hell do you get the texture of tomatoes while still retaining its juiciness? But then I remembered. Eyes. Salmon eyes, to be specific, gouged and tossed onto the bun. You'll feel the crunch with each bite. Onions? Don't want to bore you, but I'm just going cartilage, diced into little bits. I know. Not all that fancy, but it's a good compliment to any meal. He laughed. You'll love the pickles though. Way I figure it, you'd want something that goes well embalmed. That's the deal with pickles, right? So it's gotta be fresh intestines, doused in lard. Who wouldn't want that? He gave his plastic scepter another spin. Of course, this has landed me where I am now. I've got my shopping cart stocked and ready to go. I'm just missing a worthy substitute for lettuce. What do you think I should do? Again Leah sat in silence a moment. Hades was going somewhere with this, and if history was repeating itself, which it most certainly was, the longer he went on, the worse of a spot they'd end in. If she didn't play along now, hollowing would be the least of her worries. Mammary glands, sliced thin, Leah decided. Most Reitzers have never had an udder ripped from a cow, and if they had, they'd probably been gorging too hard to notice its flavor. Sweet and fresh, like you're eating a newborn baby without going through the hassle. Hades nodded to the revelation. Not bad. Not fucking bad at all. See? That's what I love about you, Leah. You've got the mind for this kind of thing. I guess that wraps it up. I've got a recipe for the burger of a century, and there isn't a single thing missing. Yep, nothing at all. He paused and watched her, his scarlet eyes probing deep. Leah cleared her throat. Here it comes. But surely, Your Excellence, you've forgotten the most important part. You can't have a proper burger without the patty. Well, isn't that obvious? I'll eat the best that pigs can buy. The creme de la creme of undead culinary options, double-decked by the hemisphere between my masterpiece meal. He gleamed. Living human brain, carved straight from the skull. There it is. No use hiding, or pretending that she had no idea what he was talking about. How much? Leah asked. His mouth gaped. I go through all that. That work of fucking art, and the only thing you have to say to me is how much. Fucking insulting. You know how much of that whole bit I was freewheeling? Just about all of it, I'll have you know, and in the end, I bullshitted a pretty bitchin' burger too. He had, and Leah's tongue salivated to the thought. But food was food, and business was business. Win or lose. Live or die. It all depended on how she played this exchange next. B1, Chapter 10, another deal, 2. Fact is that whatever Spike told you is bullshit, Leah said. I didn't steal from him. The human was my hunt. So I purged him and his crew, just like you would have done. He waved a hand. Spare me the spin. It happened, and that's that. The important part is what came next. You got yourself the only living human in your possession, and then you came to me to see what I'd offer for him. She nodded. So this brings us where we are now. You want a deal? Let's dance. For starters, we'll talk about you. Why should I do anything other than off you? You think I wouldn't have taken precautions? Leah snapped. My crew has the human in their possession, and if anything happens to me, they'll leak the news of his survival for all of Pandemonium to see. They'll distribute pics, set him up with Mother, put his nasally, human voice on the radio if they have to. How long do you think it'll be before a mob tears through these walls? She grinned. That's what this is about, isn't it? Your own power? The fact that you didn't throw a contract on me the second you learned what happened means that you want this whole thing kept under wraps. Well, there's only one way out of it, Hades. Make my fucking day or it'll be the end of yours. Hades clutched his plastic scepter a beat tighter. Cracks started to form on the hilt. All this time, and all the hard shit that you and I have been through together, and you go straight to blackmail? Is that how it's gonna be? No, I just want to see you squirm. Leah hardened. That's how it's gonna be. Hades said nothing for a time. He only went back to pacing his throne room, silently grinding his teeth as his crimson gaze searched to and fro. Leah stayed still, keeping her own face blank. There could be nothing worse for her now than showing weakness. Suddenly, Hades turned on his heels and gleamed. Gotta say, Leah, this might be the hottest thing you've ever done. You're lucky my balls don't work or I'd take you right now. Can't always get what we want. You might. He ran his thumb along cracked lips. I'm thinking it's time we bump this partnership up another level. Full access to Elysium for you. Whatever drugs you want, whatever event you'd like to attend. Hell, I'll give you a floor in a building of your choice to do whatever the fuck you want, with however many goons you need. No more waiting in line for you. About what she was expecting. Seems fair. Oh, I'm not done. Not even close. You'll also be a CO owner of Elysium, and take a cut of the picks coming in. Maybe 25%? That'd still be tens of thousands a day. There's also my lines to the distros. Could easily siphon off an endless supply of food, both body and mind. That's all before the library, of course. You can go in there whenever the fuck you want, no questions asked. And before you ask, this offer extends for, well, let's not be gauche and say life, but basically that. Until we both turn to dust, that'll be how long you get to enjoy the freebies. He sat back in his throne. So how's that feel for his size? Leah's eyes bulged as the proposition sank in. This was unprecedented. It was the kind of gratuity that Hades collected for himself, minus the burdens. She'd never have to face a hollow again, or hunt a renegade Reitzer, or feel her own res drain. No longer would she be subjected to the anchor of struggle. Her survival would be all but guaranteed. Hades leaned forward. Shadow shrouded his shriveled face as he read her mind. Of course, now it's time for you to make concessions to me. You want this kinda deal, you've gotta tell me who else knows, and I mean everyone. The words came before she could consider them. My crew. Mastermind, Kurt, Buttercup. I also went to Mother before you. He laughed. Of course you fucking did. What'd she promise? A cure. Yes. More of her usual bullshit then. Best forget about her. There's also Spike, Leah said. Not anymore. Couple hollows took a chunk out of his head. He shrugged. Oh well, accidents happen. She grimaced. Is that the endgame here? Kill everyone else who knows. Don't look so surprised. Mother gets to stay. Still need her. But your friends? They're a loose end I can't have. They're solid. They'd never tell any. PSHT. We're past negotiations, Leah. I've already done the whining and dining, so now we're on to the part where I get to fuck you. I don't care how it gets done, so long as they're dead. Anyone and everyone who so much as laid their eyes on the living fucker, you have full extrajudicial rights to bury them. And as for him? I want my burger. That shit's happening now. He leaned back. So what'll it be, Leah? Go to war with yours truly, or cash in your chips and sell the fuck out. Up until this moment, Leah had known for certain. The plan had been simple. Go to Hades, listen to what he had to say, and lie through her teeth. Delivering Liam Fenix's head wasn't half as important as the perception that he was dead, and so long as Leah could straddle both camps, she could get everything she wanted. Mother would have her research conducted in secret, and Hades would leave her alone. But this was different. Hades wasn't just offering to make her days easier. He was guaranteeing her survival as a foregone conclusion. After so much time and so much struggling, why shouldn't she get the easy ride? Leah was so desperately tired of the fight. Didn't she deserve to retire from the oppression altogether? It would hurt. To turn on her crew like that would be a tough pill to swallow. Adding their names to her list of fallen allies would burn her from the inside out, and she would never forgive herself for treating their loyalty with malice. But she could do it. Leah didn't want her story to end. She didn't want to die. If that meant dirtying her hands in one final act, then that was but a small price to pay. What was the future of others when she had her own to consider? She held out her hand. Deal. Leah would survive, no matter the cost.